Welcome to the Queen's University AMS-sponsored All Candidates Debate. My name is Jonathan Rose. I teach in the Department of Political Studies, and I'm very happy to be moderating this evening's event. So welcome, and thank you for coming. The students have chosen the topics that will be discussed, and this is the first debate where we're using social media. So these topics were chosen through Facebook and through Twitter and other forms of social media. And the topics are the economy, education, research and student learning, foreign policy, environmental policy, and then finally local politics and candidate platforms. And the format will be as follows. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to introduce themselves, and within each of those categories, we'll take questions both from the floor, from the two microphones you see on the floor, as well as through the internet, through Facebook and Twitter. And the answers will be no longer than 90 seconds. And each candidate will be given 5 red cards you see on the table there. And those cards will be rebuttal cards. And what that will enable them to do is to respond at any time in the debate to another candidate's question. And they only have 5 cards, so once they're gone, you don't come back, to quote Neil Young. So we will start immediately. Let me just introduce the candidates. On your right of the table is Eric Walton from the Green Party. And beside Eric Walton is Alicia Gordon from the Conservative Party. And beside Alicia is Daniel Beals from the New Democratic Party. And finally, Ted Hsu from the Liberal Party. So I sense this is an enthusiastic crowd, which is great, but the more enthusiasm you have, the less time we have for questions. So I'm going to ask you a couple things. One, to try to refrain your applause so that we have as much time for questions, and 2, to keep the aisles open in case people need to leave. And I'm going to ask the candidates to stand up when they're addressing the questions. So the first question on the economy comes from Twitter, and it comes from Kevin. Oh, pardon me. Absolutely. Thank you. So the order of introductions was decided beforehand, and they are as follows. Dan Beals will go first, Alicia Gordon second, Ted Hsu third, and Eric Walton fourth. So I'll begin with Daniel Beals. Daniel.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? No? Is this thing on? All right. What an amazing turnout here today, and it's so great to see all of you. When I came up, I was entering the room. The first thing I could think of is the first candidate debate I ever saw was here at Queen's in 1993. I believe at that time it was in Grand Hall. My memory is a little bit fuzzy about back then. But it was a whole experience for me. And little did I think at that time, I was just sort of very much learning about politics in general, that I would ever be in this position on this side of the table, looking out at a bunch of students and maybe thinking, maybe there's a couple of you in this crowd right now that'll be on this side of the table in a few years, and I hope that's the case. I'd like to thank the AMS for hosting today and introduce myself. I guess it's happened, he's already said my name once, but I'm Daniel Beals. I'm the federal NDP candidate. I've been a candidate for about 19 months now, and over that time I've been able to pretty much canvass door to door about 16,000 homes in the city and attend an awful lot of events, including at Queen's, and make sure that I also visited a number of organizations in the city. The whole thing about my campaign is I'm looking to be someone who can listen to you and someone who can find practical solutions for you. I'm trying to earn your trust and build your trust through my actions, and I'm looking to be your next member of Parliament.
My name is Alicia Gordon. As a mother of 3 Queen's grads, I have great affinity for this university, the work that gets done here, and all the great community work that gets done, because I've seen students volunteer over the years when they come in for Frosh Week. I understand the challenges facing our post-secondary students, and if elected, will be a strong advocate for you in Ottawa. This government recognizes the importance of investing in our colleges and universities and in research and development. This government has made tangible investments in Queen's University, like $15 million for the new Performing Arts Centre, $29 million for the new medical facility for School of Medicine, which is being built now and should be opened shortly. Grant programs for low and income families to help them get through university. Most importantly, this government recognizes that students, like all Canadians, are concerned about our continuing economic recovery. Canadians have a clear choice May the 2nd. A low-tax Conservative government that has created 500,000 new jobs since 2009 and will ensure our economy remains on track. This is no time for a U-turn. The second arrangement of maybe 3 parties, high taxes and bigger spending. The choice locally is between a member
Ms. Gordon, I'm going to have to
who
stop you
sits-
off there. Your time is up. Thank you very much.
It's great to see all of you. I'm here tonight. I was thinking about what I would say at the beginning. I'm here tonight, I realized, because in 1964, my parents decided to immigrate to Canada, here to Kingston. My dad took on a job as a professor in the Department of Chemical Engineering. And since then, my debt to Queen's University and to Kingston and to Canada has only grown. It would be my privilege to serve you as your Member of Parliament. I graduated from Queen's with a degree in physics, and I took a doctorate in physics as well, and I've published about 25 research papers. I also spent 10 years working in finance, eventually running a line of business for Morgan Stanley in Japan. Here in Kingston, I've been working in the last few years to make this area a center for sustainable energy and bring green energy jobs to Kingston. I would like to bring that unique background to Ottawa in the service of Kingston and the islands. Thank you very much.
No? No? Test? Well, thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for the MS for organizing this event. This is my 4th election, believe it or not. It's getting more fun each time. Maybe this time I can win. These are very interesting times for people in Kingston and for graduates. I graduated in 1982, which was also a very interesting time. We had a double-dip recession. We had lots of worries. But I must say, it wasn't like it is now. We didn't have the specter of rapid climate change, the kind of instability in the economy, the food shortages, the peak oil. All these things are converging. And it's going to require an unbelievable amount of creativity from all of us, including our leaders, to deal with these issues. And I don't see this possibility in Ottawa that is toxic, where there's so much competition for power that people aren't talking to each other and aren't problem solving. So we need to change the environment in Parliament in order to deal with the problems that we have. And a number of ways we can do that is by changing the way we elect our MPs. We need proportional representation so that cooperation is rewarded. We also need to make sure our leaders muzzle their attack dogs who enjoy disrupting and creating havoc in Parliament. And finally, we need Greens in Parliament. We need Greens to bring new ideas, a new way of discussion. We need Greens to present to Canadians the solutions that are happening around the world. Greens are around the world, and they are presenting ideas. Thank you.
Thank you all to the candidates. Now we'll begin our first section, which is on the economy. And I'll invite any of you who would like to ask questions to come to the microphone on the economy. And I'll remind you that if you do have a question, the question needs to be addressed to all candidates. It can't be directed to a particular candidate or party. So our first question comes from Twitter, and it comes through by Kevin Imrie, a student here. And his question is, what will your party do to improve the economic lot of young Canadians? And we'll answer it starting from Ted Hsu and working down.
I think that the first thing to start off for young Canadians is education, and it starts from right when you're born. The Liberal Party is going to, in its platform, fund programs in early learning, provide childcare spaces, but also we're going to be doing something called the Learning Passport. We're going to be giving $1,000 a year for the first 4 years of post-secondary education to everybody. And that's going to replace about $400 or $500 in tax credits that you have to get by filling out your tax return, and you get it at the end of the year. You'll get that $1,000 at the beginning of the year. And that's because in our platform, we want to support education, and we believe that Canada's economy in the 21st century is going to have to compete in the world on the basis of quality and on the basis of innovation, and not on the basis of lower wages. And to prepare for that kind of economy, we need the best educated country on the planet.
Thanks to Kevin for that question, if Kevin is in here. Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to sort of bridge away from that and talk about the prospects of job creation. And as far as the NDP is concerned, and what we've always been concerned about, is trying to make sure that everyone has a job, that not only pays them, but pays them a wage that they can afford to live, afford to have a quality of life in this country. And the way we're proposing to do that, especially this time around in our platform, is there's a couple ways. The first is by empowering small business. And the reason we're focusing on small business is because small business creates 50% of the jobs in this country. More than that, it's small business that's rooted in our communities. So the small businesses that exist in this area, they're the people that we live and work with every day. They're the people we see down the street. They're the people who are running things right in our community. And we're going to lower the small business tax from 11% to 9% to try to encourage small businesses to create more jobs for people. The other thing we're going to do for the larger businesses is try to promote them to through a job creation credit of up to $4,500 to create new jobs in the bigger business sector. I'll leave it at that because I think I'm going to run out of time in a second here.
Like I said, I'm a mother of 3 Queen's grads. One who went to RMC, served in the military Iraq, a daughter who graduated from law. And one of the things she was concerned about was whether the law firm she's working at would keep her. This government has created 500,000 new jobs since 2009. We were close to a 1930s type recession when Wall Street went down, folks. This government put in a lot of money, $16 billion. 16.5% is the corporate tax rate right now, and that's where we want to keep it. And we want to keep it there because we want to create more investment. More investment means more jobs. My daughter said because the economy is strong, she was able to keep her job at McCarthy Tetro. So we do need to keep focusing on that. But I have true life experiences from it. I know a lot of you are going to graduate soon and you want a job. So we must keep the economy strong. And this government is doing that by keeping the corporate tax rate at 16.5%. We're not going to hike it. The Liberals want to hike the tax rate, and that will kill 200,000 jobs. Will be gone.
We would do 3 things. We would change the way our tax system works so that we incentive the green economy. This would create much more opportunities for local businesses. So instead of globalization pulling jobs away from North America, we would keep them in our country. We'd also change the way we support venture capital. Right now, we have a problem of venture capital in this country. We can't find it. It's very difficult to grow your business and to keep them in Canada. So we would match dollar for dollar local venture capital raised in local communities and run by the community economic development agencies and the Business Development Bank. And finally, we have a plan for youth, because there's a huge youth underemployment crisis in this country. So we have a plan for 40,000 community service positions for 4 years. That's 160,000 positions. And this would be funded, fully funded within our budget. And to give you a quick synopsis, it's like Katimavik, but magnified.
Daniel, you wanted to respond to one of those?
Yeah, I have to respond to Alicia's comments on corporate tax cuts. And the reason being that the Liberal Party, it's only this last platform where they decided they finally opposed corporate tax cuts. They were all for them for, the last 15 years, and it was Paul Martin who started a lot of them. Beyond that, the main problem I have with it is they haven't been shown to work. All the studies that I've seen says that all we saw was an increase in profits. There was no increase in jobs and no increase in money spent on capital costs within the country.
Thank you. Eric Walton.
What I find particularly offensive about corporate tax cuts is it was done with debt. At the very least, the Conservatives should have done it out of surpluses. But to take the money from corporate taxation and instead put it into debt and give them tax cuts, I think was not responsible fiscal management. So I think the Conservatives need to explain to Canadians why we have to pay now interest on that debt from corporate tax cuts.
We all have our opinions, don't we? And that's what's wonderful about this country. But let me just tell you about corporate tax cuts. Those of you who have pensions, RRSPs, education savings funds, where do you think that money is? It's in corporations. People often look at corporations as the big bad wolf. They employ many people, and I can tell you, Bell Canada is investing $50 million in mental health. So corporations, not only do they give jobs to people, they're very giving.
Thank you very much. So, thank you, candidates, for sticking within your time limits as well. And I'm going to open up the floor to the microphones for questions relating to the economy. I'll ask questioners to keep their question as succinctly as possible.
Okay, thank you.
And if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Mike Byrne. In the 1980s, I can't remember the exact date, but every single party in Parliament agreed to eliminate child poverty by the year 2000. Every party agreed to eliminate child poverty by the year 2000. Last year, the United Nations published reports showing that Canada finished 17 or 18 out of 25 countries in terms of a bad record in regards to child material well-being. Most of us here would agree that children should be a number one priority, but the facts seem to suggest otherwise. So my question to the candidates is, what happened?
Okay, thank you. And we'll begin with Daniel Beals and work down the table that way.
Thanks for that question. What did happen, and I want to point out that that particular bill that was put forward in 1989 was by Ed Broadbent. It was the last bill he put forward as the leader of the NDP at that time. And it was a very hopeful time, but unfortunately what we have seen, and I think this is the point that New Democrats like to make over and over, is a series of conservative and liberal governments that have traded back and forth, and then each time the leadership and the will has not been there to address the poverty issue. We are looking for that will this time around, and we want to step up as New Democrats and say, this is our chance, this was our bill that we originally put forward, let's get in there and we're going to show the will and the leadership to handle child poverty and actually make a fresh commitment to it. Now, how are we going to do that? One of the things we're talking about, new mixed child benefit, where you would roll in a lot of the benefits that exist already and streamline them, and that up to $700 per child. This is to ensure that the families that have those children are not going to have them starting out in a poverty situation. The other thing we're going to do is try to provide nutritional school lunches from across the country and make sure that we get a start on good nutritional health for every child in this country.
Lisa Gordon.
I must say I'm very proud to be a member of the Kingston community. This community serves it very well through the United Way. We have some great organizations here. The United Way, 27 agencies fall under the United Way here. Last year, $3 million was raised. Everyone in the community got together to help the poor children here in Kingston. Also, I've been involved for many years with a program it's a food sharing. That's what it is. It's a food sharing program. That program raises $20,000 a year so that each child here in Kingston can have breakfast. And those programs, we need to keep helping our local communities provide those programs. It's up to all of us here in this room to look after our own community.
Well, we know child poverty can be dramatically reduced because European countries who had a plan and followed through managed to do it. The problem in Canada is we made a promise and we didn't have a plan to follow. It's a complex subject that involves multiple changes, and you have to pursue those changes, an integrated plan over time. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to have a plan with a 10-year horizon and benchmarks along the way. And if MPs don't hit those targets, they get a 22% pay cut. Remember when welfare rates were cut 22%? I guarantee you the focus on eliminating child poverty will be laser-like.
I think that we failed. I think that we failed in a mission that we should have been undertaking. The reason I got into politics is because I sincerely believe, my core belief in getting into politics is that we today should be fair to future generations. We today should be solving the problems that we have today, whether it's child poverty, climate change, environmental destruction, challenges to the debt that we have, the financial debt. We should be solving the problems today, and I acknowledge that promises were made to solve child poverty by many years ago. And I pledge to you that I will keep this in my mind if I'm elected as your member of parliament, to make sure that we solve our problems today and that we don't pass them on to the next generation as we've just done in the last couple of decades.
Thank you very much. The second question on the microphone to the right.
Thanks very much. My name's Hugh McKenzie. I have the figures from the OECD, and actually the Liberal government well outperformed the Conservative over the last 5 years compared to the other industrialized countries in terms of economic growth. So I don't think it's a question of which party has done better. It's certainly not a question that the Conservatives have outperformed the Liberals over that time period. But my question is really to do with income disparity. We are at an all-time high, going back to the days of Rockefeller and the oil barons in the 1910s. The income disparity is now the top 1% earns 22 times the average salary. The question is that a problem? And if so, what do each of the parties propose to do about it?
Thank you. We'll start with Alicia Gordon.
Well, I have my own ideas about some of that. I know that I think you can earn about $10,637 and not pay taxes. Well, I'm getting to that, but thank you. I'd like to see that moved up. I'd like to see that number bumped up. And if I was your member, I would work on seeing if we could move that number up to 20,000. And those that make $20,000 pay no tax. So that would be one of my goals if I was elected as your MP, to try and work towards something like that, where you don't pay tax when you're only making $20,000 a year. Thank you.
Alicia's been listening to our policy, because that's actually our policy. I think the problem with making policy on the fly is that Stephen Harper is not exactly the guy who listens to his MPs. What I find incredible is that to raise it from $10,000 to $20,000, it's $600 million a year, and that's it. And the amount of benefit you would give that group of people is so great. I mean, look at it this way. The G8, G20 summit was $1.2 billion. There's funding for 2 years right there.
Well, oh, sorry, Ted.
So it's hard to tell. There is a cost to income disparity. We know that societies that have great ranges in income are less healthy, less happy compared to societies where income is much more equally distributed. Now, there's a question as to how what sort of things you can do to make sure that we don't have great disparities in income. Someone once called Harvard University the great social leveler, I don't know the exact term, in American society. But the idea behind that is that education is something that we can use as a tool to give equality of opportunity. And equality of opportunity can lead to a healthier society and can address some of these problems with income disparity. And so I think the best thing that we can do, one of the best things that we can do, is to invest in education and make sure that all of the underprivileged groups that we can identify in our country, and that includes, for example, Aboriginal Canadians, new immigrants, and other groups, make sure that they all have access to education and we have equality of opportunity so that everybody can participate in the economy of the 21st century on an equal opportunity basis.
Sorry again. In answer to your question, yes, it's a problem, and it's a problem because as that money is pooled in the top level, we've seen people in the middle level start to fall down to the bottom. And I see it at the doorway every day now. I see it especially with pensioners because their pensions don't keep up with inflation. And as food has gotten more expensive, as their home heating has gotten more expensive, their purchasing power and ability to pay their bills has started to dwindle. Now, how do we change that? I think we have to start to look at what is the concept of progressive taxation again, and why have we gone away from it over the last, X number of years. And what progressive taxation means is instead of lowering these taxes for corporations and then giving us the HST, which basically unfairly taxes us for the money that we're giving to the corporation, the other thing we can do is go back to a level where we start to tax people with a lot of wealth more. I know it's radical. I know some people don't like it. But frankly, if we're going to keep the money from pooling at the top and we're going to distribute it more fairly and justly and with an eye towards how people can afford a quality of life, that is exactly what we have to do.
Mic check. Audience request, if you could speak a little less into the mic, it's actually quite loud and maybe I'm just oversensitive. All right. My question is about the economy, specifically the Bank of Canada as an institution and the fact that its usage has been on the decline very sharply actually since 1974, and I just want to bring up a statistic from the Canada Auditor General Report from 1993 that said that our federal debt of $423 billion. Of that debt, 91% of it was from compounded interest. Because basically, there was a switch actually in financial policy in 1974 with Jean Chrétien as the finance minister under Trudeau, where instead of actually financing our spending via the Bank of Canada, which was set up in 1935, nationalized by William Mackenzie King, in fact, which was directly responsible for the greatest boom in economic prosperity, basically from the 40s till the 70s. But I'll just keep this short by saying that there's a very informative documentary you should watch called The Crime of the Canadian Banking System. The question is, what will you do to address the fact that we are only using 2% of that our money, only 2% of it is generated by the Bank of Canada, while we are paying runaway interest rates, and we have for the past 5 decades, and it's during the 90s that, oh sorry, I'll keep it short just by saying that the Conservatives, in fact, in the 90s, slashed social spending because of this runaway interest, which was completely unnecessary. And my vote will go to whoever promises that they will address the financial fraud that has been perpetrated on the Canadian people for the past 5 decades.
This is a discussion that we've had in the Green Party for some time about the Bank of Canada. And I guess I may not totally satisfy you. I would not be comfortable with the Bank of Canada lending itself money, which is ultimately what we're talking about. But what I would be prepared to do is decrease the amount of loans the commercial banks can make in order to allow the Bank of Canada to lend money as a special bond, on a special bond issue for specific projects. So in other words, if we decided we wanted to retrofit all the public institutions in Canada, and that required, say, $10 billion or $50 billion, we would have a referendum on a specific bond for that kind of loan. And the reason I say that is because I'm very concerned about the ability of politicians to use the Bank of Canada to pork barrel if it's interest-free lending that the Bank of Canada would do. But I do believe there are specific investments, for instance, to end homelessness or for energy efficiency, where as a country we can make the business case that this kind of lending will not undermine our currency and will be for the positive benefit of the country. So partial answer, yes, but with real restrictions.
The question is whether we should be borrowing from the Bank of Canada to finance different things that the government might want to do. Well, in fact, that happens already. The way it works is the government borrows money, issues bonds in order to pay for spending. And if the Bank of Canada decides it wants to buy those bonds, which it does sometimes, then effectively, because the Bank of Canada is holding Government of Canada bonds, we are borrowing from the Bank of Canada. When the Bank of Canada decides it wants to stimulate the economy, it will buy bonds and it pays out money, and that puts more money into the economy, and that stimulates the economy. When the Bank of Canada is worried about inflation, it will do the opposite. It will sell bonds and takes money out of the economy. So naturally, I think very naturally, this is not a question that we need to ask, because very naturally, if we're in a situation where we're worried about slow growth and we're not worried about inflation, the Bank of Canada will buy government bonds and put more money into the system. And that's equivalent to borrowing from the Bank of Canada.
I don't know. That sounded like quite a shell game to me as things are moving back and forth. And he's the guy who's the money guy, not me, I suppose. But really what it comes down to is we have to understand that if we're not taking it from the Bank of Canada, we're taking it from private banks. And we are paying that interest to them. And how do private banks make money? Well, because the governments of that day, they have to be... Bring it on. Okay, for the governments of that day... So the bottom line is, are we going to put all of our interest, are we going to pay it to private banks, or are we going to pay it to ourselves? But the key is, if we're going to do this, we have to make sure that the things we use the Bank of Canada for are really valuable things, which goes back to what Eric said, and he's absolutely right. We have to make sure that it's specific infrastructure and value that lasts for a long time. That's when you use the Bank of Canada. You would use it to, say, build the St. Lawrence Seaway. You'd use it for things like that. Now, I would propose maybe 2 things we could use it for that way and increase the amount of usage. One would be high-speed internet across this country. That is a large infrastructure project that we could have all across the country, and the value would go on and on. The other thing was when we renegotiate the healthcare accord in 2014, we may want to consider saving the interest that goes on what we pay for healthcare and doing healthcare through the Bank of Canada. That is human infrastructure that does not go away.
Was there a rebuttal card on that? Okay. And Alicia Warden.
Well, this government is committed to cutting the deficit by 2015, and we're on a path to do that. I don't appreciate the laughter, if you wouldn't mind. I'm glad you think I'm funny. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you. So this government is on the road to cutting the deficit. By 2015, we should be there. I can tell you the Liberal government under Paul Martin wanted to balance the books right away. And he did so. But he did so by cutting health care and cutting your education. This government has put 40% back into education since it's been in power. We are on a path. We understand the road we're going down. This economy is the best in the G7 right now. And we are working towards cutting that deficit by 2015, and then we'll bring in other programs. But for now, we're not going to do it on the backs of cutting healthcare and education. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for another question on the economy. Oh, sorry, Ted. Thank you.
I'd just like to respond to a couple of things that Dan said. One thing, and I think it just shows that you have to be a little bit careful if you want to understand what's going on. What you said was that he's worried about high interest rates paid to banks when banks finance the government spending. But in fact, government bonds pay interest rates that are too low because they're risk-free. They're too low for banks. Banks don't hold bonds. They like to make loans that have some risk so that they can earn higher interest rates. You know, that's a fundamental thing that you got to know. Who do we pay the high interest rates? You probably have some money invested in loans for projects that are risky, that need financing. A lot of people have government bonds in their pension funds. You know, it's you and me and people around the world. In fact, it's not banks.
Can you hear me now? There we go. All right, I'm just going to hold this here. I'm a former executive director of the Food Sharing Project here in Kingston. We feed almost 4,000 kids a day. It's a breakfast and lunch program that's in the public schools and the Catholic school system. And feeding 4,000 kids a day, we do it with 3.5 staff. All the rest is volunteer staff. So it's a pretty impressive program. And there are some people here on this panel that have raised money for that program. So anyone that says that there's starving kids at school, there's not. There's a program in place that feeds every single kid. Doesn't matter if the lunch gets left at home, it's not made, or is left in the back of the SUV as the parents drive to work at Queens. So every kid in the school gets fed. There's food in every single school. But the biggest problem we have running a program like this is our food costs. And the biggest impact on food costs in the Canadian economy right now is gas prices. So I'm going to ask my question, and if you could premise it with a yes or no, and then your justification. Are you for increased taxes on gas? Thank you.
And we'll start with Ted and work down.
No, I'm not in favor of increased taxes on gas.
Thanks for that. Jeff. My wife is an EA in the school system, and she works at Frontenac Public School, and she also works at Rideau Public School. And I think the program you're talking about is a very good program, but there still are kids that are not having lunch, and there still are kids that have nutritional problems that way. But I'm not taking away from those kinds of programs at all. As far as gas prices go, I think everyone is, many calls we got this week about how high gas prices were going. And I wouldn't be in favor of raising them at this time, but what I would be in favor of, and what the NDP is proposing to do in our platform, is taking a cent of the current tax, an extra cent of the current tax that's being taken from gas, and moving it into public transit. And that's just a thing that we're going to do to try to slowly shift the balance from the gas that's being used for individual cars to public transit.
Luckily, I bought myself a hybrid about 4 years ago, so I was anticipating the gas prices going up. Of course, I do not favor higher gas prices because, of course, that adds cost to many things like food. So we need to look at our gas prices. I'm not sure what I can do about that at this point in time, but as your member, I would take that to the House and see if we could maybe save a few cents here or there on gas. Thank you.
If you were an oil company executive and you wanted to maximize revenue, you would do exactly what we're doing now. You would spike gases up and then bring them down quickly before people change their behavior. And then you'd spike it up again and bring it down. And you wouldn't get the kind of fleet conversion, the kind of behavior change that would make us energy resilient like in Europe. In Europe, they drive more energy efficient cars because they brought in a graduated carbon tax that changes behavior over time. What we would do is we would wait until the price drops again, and we'd introduce a revenue neutral green tax shift. What that would do is it would raise carbon, it would charge rate on carbon, but they would offset that extra charge with income tax cuts, so your disposable income would be the same. But what it would do is it would give signals to the economy how to adjust so that in time we're less dependent on gas. If we stay with the status quo, we will have cars and homes and businesses that are not energy efficient, and oil companies will keep 100 cents on the increase. With a green tax shift, we'll give the money back to you, and we'll have a fuel-efficient economy.
Thank you for your answers. We're going to move to the second category, which is appropriate to this venue and this place, and it's education. And our first one comes through Twitter, and given Kingston's particular nexus of a university and college town, I think it's appropriate. It comes from a Sam Gregory, who asks, what will each party do for university and college students to help them? And we'll start with Dan Beals.
Thank you very much. Well, the one thing that the NDP has recognized is that one of the biggest problems is tuition fees. And I think it's something that everyone's struggling with here. I hope that most people have recognized it's a struggle. It was a struggle for me when I was at university here. But the key is when the federal government, makes these transfers to the provinces specifically for post-secondary education and things like that, it isn't really accountable. The provinces are going to use it in a certain way. They divvy it up, they take it, they move it around. And what we tend to find out is that it doesn't always go where we wanted it to go. Sorry. So what the NDP is proposing this time around is that there's going to be a specific transfer of $800 million this in the first budget, and it's going to be specifically for tuition fees. Now, this means that the provinces will be directed to use it specifically for that person, and that's going to give a lot of people a chance to see either their tuition fees capped or lowered thanks to that amount of money put in there. That's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing I'd sort of like to focus on is basically housing. And housing is a huge problem in this town. This town has the lowest vacancy rate in Ontario right now, and that means it's hard for students and hard for everyone. We're talking about a federal transfer going for housing and stable federal funding for affordable housing. That will affect what's going to happen in this municipality from now on.
This government is giving grants for low and middle income students now, okay? Part-time students, students with disabilities are getting grants. Those grants, they don't even pay back. There were 290,000 students that received these grants. This is more than double that received them from the previous Liberal government. The same Liberal government that cut education and health care. And we've had to top it up 40%. Scholarships and bursaries are tax-free. Textbooks, you get tax credits. Increased investments in Canadian graduate scholarships. $20 million was invested in this community for a program called Pathways for Education, which is a great program, and I know there's some students here from Queens who are involved in that program. Thank you.
We only have one federal university in Canada, and that's RMC. So this is a provincial jurisdiction, which means that we haven't been able to do the kind of creativity in policy that I would like. We have the grants, we have the scholarships, we have the research funding, we have all that, but that's not good enough for me. My vision is free undergraduate education, and I'll tell you why. When we gave free high school education, it was because you needed that minimum level of skills to compete in the economy, to work, to help that economy thrive. We are now more advanced. We have more information technology. We have more information that we have to process. We need the level of undergraduate for our economy to thrive. It should be free. Graduate studies would still have a tuition, but we should change the way we operate our economy as they have done in other countries in Europe. Thank you.
I want to mention two things. One is relief in the near term. And the Liberal platform contains something called the Learning Passport. As I mentioned before, it's $1,000 a year for the first 4 years of post-secondary education. And it replaces some tax credits that you would have currently get by filling out your tax return and then getting $400 or $500 in credits at the end of the year. So it's more financial support, and it's easier to obtain, and you get it at a time when you need it. There is also going to be up to $1,500 in loan forgiveness if you volunteer up to 150 hours of your time. And there's also going to be payment for the post-secondary education for people finishing their service in the Canadian Forces and who want to retrain to get a civilian job.
That was from
Is that why
before.
you're so sharp? Yes. That's okay. No, but so I only had rebuttal time for that. I didn't have the full time for my answer to the question. Yes. Okay, and I thought you were giving me time for my statement, but if I could have 45 more seconds, I would appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do it that way? So I just told you about some near-term aid, financial aid for students, but you're talking to the students here. You're young, so we should be planning for what Canada's economy is going to be like in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, and so we should be making long-term investments. And the long-term investments we should be making are in research. And in the kind of economy that we're going to have in the next few decades. And this government has been cutting funding to basic research. It's been cutting funding to our research councils. I am somebody who is a product of the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council. And if you send me to Ottawa, I will make sure that our research councils, our national research councils, get funded. And so I think that's very important. I can offer short-term financial support for students, but we've got to have a long-term plan for Canada's economy. And the Liberal plan is based on a highly educated workforce, competing on quality, competing on innovation, and looking for looking really forward many decades and all the different strategies to do with taking care of our young people to make sure that we can provide for them for many decades to come.
Sorry that I have to use cue cards, but there's so many numbers here I can't memorize them all. Research, $510 million for Canada Foundation for Innovation, $120 million, Canada's Advanced Research and Innovation Network. Genome Canada, an additional $75 million, $135 million over 2 years to the National Research Council of Canada. In the March 2010 budget, this was on the web page of Queen's. Federal initiative will benefit Queen's. $32 million to 3 major granting councils, $8 million to research again, $45 million postdoctorate fellowship programs, and $220 million in funding over 5 years from multi-university initiative, which Queen's is part of. Thank you.
Recently, the NRC boss stated that to his staff that he would like to see research funds move towards market drivers and towards technologies. This has been highlighted with a shift in the last 4 or 5 years towards funding basically these market drivers at a cost to pure science research. And this is the kind of research that is done at universities around Canada. So I would like to know what each of your parties would be doing in order to promote research at universities. Thank you.
Well, I have another number here that I wasn't able to get out. Thank you. $85 million per year, federal granting councils for research targeting priorities like health sciences, energy, the environment, ICTs, management, and business. That's what this government is doing. Thank you.
Well, one thing I'd like to do is I'd like to see a better balance with more funding for the social sciences research, so it's not just all sort of pushed over to natural sciences, engineering, medicine, as valuable as that is. The problem here is that universities are running out of money. They don't have enough funding to do the things they need to do. So they're looking at the market, they're looking at public-private partnerships, they're looking at corporations for support. And I think there's a real problem there when we start going that direction. You can have some support from corporations, but not to the point where they're driving your agenda. What I think we need to do in Canada is we need to build up endowments, big endowments like we see in the United States. And the way to do that is to offer special tax incentives for people to make endowment donations at the end of life. And that's the kind of federal leadership that could help universities rapidly build up their endowments so that there's a third revenue or fourth revenue stream like you see at some of the big American universities.
I think there's a problem with targeting priorities, as was mentioned previously. And what that really means is they're forcing researchers to do as much as they can on research with immediate applications that benefit companies immediately. And you know, we have a problem in Canada. The reason why people think we have to do that is that businesses in Canada don't do as much research and development as they do in other countries. And we should be getting businesses to do more R&D and not making up for that by taking money away from basic research in Canada. Because if we take away money from basic research, we're mortgaging the long-term future, and that's going to affect young people.
Just to build upon that, I think I echo that just to say that universities are supposed to be the place where that kind of pure research is done. And once you let market-driven forces come in there, you're basically robbing yourself of that pure research. The other concern I have about it, and this is more of a concern than a solution because I think we've heard some good solutions here now, nothing I disagree with. But basically, what this sort of amounts to is like a public subsidy to the private sector. That is, the private sector is getting involved with universities. They're essentially getting the work done for them at a cut rate instead of doing their own R&D. Essentially, that means those of you who are doing that kind of market-driven research here, you're basically putting yourself out of a job in the future. You're doing the work that you would be doing, getting paid as a professional later. I think that's problematic, and I think that's why we do have to look for different solutions to keep the research in university as pure research.
I think it's on now. Okay, let's talk about education and priorities. Budgets and platforms at their base reflect priorities, and there's no two ways about that. So Canadians deserve economic platform points and public policy that are based on sound research and policy work. As a random example, for years now, our research has shown that crime is down, and that rehabilitation is more effective as a corrective approach in terms of alleviating recidivism rates and making our communities safer. Yet we have a party in power that has closed prison farms and wants to build bigger prisons. So how are you, using sound public policy, going to prioritize the needs of Canadians and make sure that your party is doing the right thing? Answer me, is your party for building more and bigger prisons instead of putting that money towards, say, supporting provinces, delivering a better educational system that builds a stronger Canada?
You know what, I'm actually going to disallow that question because prison farms are questions for the last category. So cool. As interesting and useful as it was, I'm going to ask you to hold that. Thanks, Salamine.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully my questions are more on topic. My name is Chris Horkins. I've been a student at Queen's for 7 years, which is 4 elections, if anyone's counting. So a lot of people say that students don't vote, and I have a little theory about why that is, and it's because our votes don't count. And I'm not just talking about conservative operatives canceling our ballots in Guelph. I'm talking about all over. I'm talking about from coast to coast all over this country, we have a first-past-the-post electoral system that really discounts our vote because it's dispersed. Because the student vote... Professor Rose, I know you are interested in hearing the answer to this.
Whether that's true or not is immaterial, but is this a question about the economy?
I thought we were on education.
Education.
Yeah, what I'm asking is, what would you do? How would you vote on a free vote on the electoral system to help student votes, which are dispersed, count in the next election?
For tall people, and I'm out of that number. Can you hear me over there? Somebody who understands technology. Very good. Eric Walton said the wisest thing that was said about education so far. At one point, we decided that high school had to be free because people to function, to reach the limits of their ability, had to have a high school education. My father went to school in one of the southern border states. Will look like that if Mr. Harper continues. In that state, public education went to grade 6. My grandfather had to pay prep school fees for the next 6 years so that my father could get into the university, become a professional engineer, and be employed all the way through the Depression. Think of all the bright kids who didn't have that chance. We've been sold a bill of goods saying, you heard it from Mike Harris, you heard it from many other conservatives, the students are the ones that get the advantage of the education, therefore they should pay for it themselves. That is an opinion, not a fact, and it's not a very good opinion. You go out of here and you go to work for somebody. If you only add the amount of your salary to that company's cash flow, you're somebody who worked for them last year. If you only produce double your salary and increase cash flow, you were somebody who was working there until a month or so ahead. To the extent that your education here teaches you how to do a job, it's your employer who is getting the benefit, and those corporations should be paying taxes at the usual rate in the sophisticated world, at least 25%.
Is there a question?
As the Globe and Mail had that nice bit, corporate taxes, low corporate taxes do not. But it's relevant because that was part of the argument for shifting the cost of education onto the students.
Could I ask
and
you
off the back of the employers, where it belongs.
Thank you. Eric.
Well, I agree. The benefits to the state, from people educated at post-secondary level far exceed the cost. So why we would not make it free and make as many people available to as many people is beyond me. The idea of a new corporate tax, which is an employee preparation tax, which goes towards funding universities, is an interesting idea. But it is something we should do. I think undergraduate education should be free, and I think it's something which will pay for itself 10 times over. I'll be back.
Actually, we're just going to go down this way. That's okay. We'll start with Ted. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'm confused because I don't know what the question is, and I'm just lost.
I think the question is about the balance of burden for paying for education on the state or the student.
Okay. As I said before, I do believe that education is a great equalizer. And it's not just university education. It's our community colleges and apprenticeships. It's a great way of trying to equalize things and providing equality of opportunity in our society. So in fact, I do believe that most of the cost of education should be borne by society. However, I do believe that it's good to have a little bit of the cost borne by the student, just so that you feel that you're paying something and you are participating, sharing the cost of your education. I do believe in that. I always believe in sharing the cost, but I do believe that society should pay most of the cost for education.
Just wondering where Eric went. Okay, it was hard for me to understand the question a little bit as well. I understand we're still talking about whether or not we should make education free. I think in a perfect world, that's what we do want. And as a party, that's certainly what we've proposed before. That's what we want, is for post-secondary education to be free. At the current time, that is not part of our platform, because we are aiming to become the next government and balance the budget, and it just certainly wouldn't be possible doing that. But what we have done and what we have put forward is a bill that would basically make access to post-secondary education a right. And by making access to and I'm talking about making a right no different than the right to universal health care. So this is part of this. The tuition program that I talked about earlier is just one aspect of that. Increasing the amount of Canada student grants by $200 million a year is actually another part of it. However, the key thing about it is when you make a commitment as a government and as a party that you're going to move towards that direction, first you have to guarantee access to everyone. You have to make sure that that is part of your plan, and that's sort of the way we're going to move forward. And then piece by piece, we're going to make sure we get there so that everyone does have the ability to get post-secondary education.
I also believe that education is very important. We'd all love to get everything for free. But at the end of the day, who's going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? We want to be hard on corporations that employ people. Right now, the corporation's tax rate is at 16.5%, which is in the middle of the pack. And because of that, they are creating jobs. They are giving back to the community. Jack Mintz, who actually graduated here from Queens with an MA, world-renowned tax expert, commented that 1-point tax reduction expands our tax base by 7.5%. If we hike our tax base, we will lose $50 billion in 7 years and 200,000 jobs. If we don't have a strong economy and people aren't working, you can't pay for anything.
Eric, on a rebuttal?
I find it interesting that conservatives are worried about corporate taxes when they're bringing in a stealth tax on EI premiums. They're going up 35% to help pay their deficit. The Liberals did the same thing, so they picked up lessons from them. Instead of saying EI premiums should be paid into a separate account, they go into general revenues to pay off debt. This is really deceiving Canadians, and the Conservatives are doing this. They keep saying we're not going to raise taxes. They have a stealth tax on EI premiums, which hurts employment, which hurts business. So don't believe them when they say they're friendly to business.
Okay. And I'll ask questioners to keep their questions as brief as possible, please.
Okay, so my question is hopefully pertaining to education. I believe so. I'm a grad student. I'm in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. I have a lot of co-workers that are international students, and they do a lot of TAing. Sometimes they come and they're here for 2 years for an undergraduate degree or a master's degree, and then 4 for a PhD. And all that time before used to be able to be used as work experience, except now, because of a small social policy change brought on by the Conservative government, that experience can't work towards their work experience. And so they're here, they are in a predicament where it's working against them to become a landed immigrant and whatnot. And so all that funding that Ms. Gordon was talking about, going into education, going to funding, going to research, is effectively being outsourced back to different countries because the people that we're educating, we're not interested in keeping them in Canada. So I want to know if anyone could speak to this and explain how all this money that we're putting into post-secondary education and research is going into people that we don't really are not interested in keeping in Canada.
With Trevor.
I've been a TA before as a graduate student, and it is quite a bit of work, and it takes away time from doing research, and you have to prepare as well. I'm not familiar with the technical details of the changes that you mentioned, but I would be happy to look into it, and I do understand the argument that we should be giving some kind of credit for work for what TAs do, because I've done that work.
Well, I'm going to thank you for that question as well, but I have to admit, I don't quite know the details of that as well. Just from what you described, it sounds like a policy that's completely disagreeable. What I want to do, though, is address the second part, is where is this money going, the money that's going in there? How is money being spent and moved around at universities? And the insight that I have tried to take from that is just from following and being involved in this community, coming down here to events over the last year and a half. And what I have found is there are things going on at Queen's right now, things that we haven't even had a chance to talk about in this section yet, as far as cuts to academics, two-tiered tuition, there's things that are going on, and what is happening with all that. And what I'm going to propose is that while this institution is still a public institution, what we are seeing happen to it right now is it moving from a public to a private model. Now, when I say that, it's not that, little pieces of it are being privatized off, but more than that, what I'm saying is we're seeing a model where the administration is increasing and the frontline staff is decreasing. And for frontline staff, that also means that the ones that are putting in work get minimized. So what is happening? One of the stats I heard at one of the events down here was that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 66% was academics, 33% was administration. Now it's 54% academics, 46% are administration. At what point is this not a place of learning anymore?
Well, I'd just like to say that the Harper government doesn't come up with their ideas on their own. They actually do meet. I met with the principal here at Queen's. He's met with the government, and they sit down and they discuss different things that the university would like and try and work together to provide the things that Queen's needs. I'm not aware of the situation that you're speaking with about the TAs. My daughter was a TA as well when she was in law school here. So I would be happy to sit down with you and learn more about that. But again, the government doesn't just come up with their policies on their own. They do consult with universities and principals from the universities.
I think this is part of a much bigger problem. A group of immigration lawyers have just put out a press release warning Canadians that, in fact, the Conservatives are a stealth anti-immigrant party. What we're seeing is a minority government that wants to win votes. So they're going to the very ethnic voters, but they only see them as a vote base. What we're seeing elsewhere is immigrants being disadvantaged more and more by this government. If we give them majority, what we're going to have is an anti-immigration party in this country. People have said, for a country with so much immigrants, it's incredible that no party is anti-immigrant. Well, we're about to see, if they win a majority, an anti-immigration party in this country, and it will be called Conservative.
Alicia for a rebuttal.
Well, my maiden name was Alicia Kwiacińska. Ja mówię po polsku. So I am an immigrant, and I don't feel that that's what's happening here. Don't feel that that's happening here, Eric. So this is really an interesting crowd. You know what? You're a lot nicer than the ambassador. Let me just say that. Much nicer than the ambassador was. So anyway, I'm an immigrant. My father came here with a suitcase and a pair of shoes. So we were taught very young that we had to work for everything that we earned. And then we passed that on to our children who've worked very hard. All graduates of this wonderful institution, MBA, a law degree, a teaching degree, and a Vanier Cup for 2009.
Question on that microphone?
Let's wait for the sound guys to turn that on. Is this on the board? There we go. I'm a graduate student in pharmacology, just to give you an idea where I'm coming from. In the last few years, I've seen a lot of or actually some substantial increases in funding for infrastructure and the new buildings and all that, and that's nice, and some modest increases in some graduate student funding through Canadian graduate scholarships. But at the same time, very large decreases in funding for operating grants from the tri-councils. I'm wondering if the candidates could comment on that, because it seems a little odd that we're building very fancy buildings and funding grad students who then have nothing to do because the labs aren't funded. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll start with Dan Beals.
Well, I think that question speaks to exactly what I was trying to talk about earlier, is the priorities of the university as it's gone on has seemed to become, it's gone from educating people and doing academics here to becoming a place where you build administration, and it's basically a land development company. And that's my worry with it. As the university has gotten into the land development business over and over, I have to wonder where the future of academics is going to be here. And it's something that's, affected a lot of people in this room, and I've read a lot of reports about it. Now, I don't have a solution for you at this time for that issue, and the reason being that this is a university issue. It's not, as a federal representative, we have to know what's going on here. Like Alicia said, we would come in, we're going to meet with the principal, and I have met with Principal Wolf about some of these issues as well. However, as we move forward, what we have to do is urge, and what I would urge everyone in this room, is the people have gotten active on these issues to keep getting active, to stand up and actually make sure you take control of your own school back and start affecting policy here. When you do that, we will be there with you, and we will help you every step of the way.
So my number on the granting councils is 32 million for the 3 granting councils. So again, that's what we've given, but it might not be enough. And we have to sit down and discuss what the university wants and needs. I know that the principal was right. Right. So 32 million is going to the professors. But it's been going down in the last few years. Okay, I'm not aware that it's been going down. Okay, I'm not aware of that. But thank you for bringing that forward. And as I say, we would sit down with the principal and with the university and decide what this university needs. For now, it's 32 million, and we'd love to give you more. To the professors. We'd love to give you more.
Eric?
The problem is post-secondary universities are being starved for money in Canada. If you look at the per-student rate in other countries, certainly the United States, they're getting much better paid. In fact, Ontario is one of the worst. Ontario is running a $25 billion deficit. Canada's running a $30 billion deficit. They want to cut their deficits, and they have health care that's going to increase in cost. Who do you think loses in the competition between healthcare and education, post-secondary? It's post-secondary. We can try as best as we can in government to channel more money to post-secondary, but ultimately you have to develop a fourth revenue stream. You have to build endowments. And that is the way to protect yourself from governments down the road, perhaps soon, perhaps later, that will further cut. Otherwise, what happens is you will be absorbed more and more into the corporate model of education. And you will have more and more connections with corporations, and we will lose the true public universities that were so important to the building of this country.
Yep, Lisa. Lisa's going to have a rebuttal, and then you'll go. Go ahead.
Can I do my rebuttal now?
Yes.
Okay. The Liberal government under Paul Martin cut healthcare, cut education. When we came into power, we put 40% back into education. We have to remember this. It's history, I know, but I have to bring it up because it's important. Right now, we're in a deficit, and this government understands that we can't cut health care and we can't cut education. In fact, Eric said we put less into education. That's not true. We put 40% into education and 33% into healthcare, plus 6% annually.
Ted, last two.
I think my friends have missed the point of the question. The point of the question, as I understand it, from having talked to my friends here on the faculty who run research groups, is that quite often you'll have the government funding a new building or a new research facility, and the minister comes and does a great announcement, but they don't think about the fact that you're going to have to pay people to run the place, smart people, to run the place for 5 years or 10 years. And that's the problem. So what we've got to have, and as a member of parliament, somebody who's worked in research and knows these things, I'm the guy who doesn't need the bureaucratic filter to know that if you're going to build a research facility, let's make sure you also include ongoing funding for a long time to make sure that we can actually use that research facility. That's the real question. That's what your MP has to understand. The second thing I'll say, since I seem to have a little bit of time left, my distinguished honorable opponent mentioned that her government has increased health care by 33%. You know what that is? That's 6% a year increase in transfers from the federal government to the provincial government under the federal provincial health care accord times 5 years gives you that 30%. You know who started that? Paul Martin, Liberal Prime Minister.
I know there are a lot of questions still to come, and I appreciate that, but in the interest of keeping the evening going, I'm going to ask that we move to the next section on foreign policy. So the next section on foreign policy, the first one I will begin through Facebook, and it comes from Blair Ostrom. And Blair asks the following question. Given the current state of the Canadian military and the needs of ongoing missions in Afghanistan and Libya, what role do you see the what role do you see the military play in continuing our international peacekeeping role? So we will begin with, who began last time? I think Alicia. Right, so Alicia.
Afghanistan. Canadian forces have been there for quite a while now, fighting terrorism with the invitation of the Afghani people. They've asked us to come. They've asked us to come and help them in Afghanistan. In July 2011, we're going to leave 1,000 soldiers there to stay with the Afghani people. The rest of our soldiers, our brave men and women, will be back to this country. And I can't say enough about our brave men and women. And some people, I don't think, in this room feel the same way about the military. And everyone's welcome to their opinion. Did we ask about Libya, or are we just asking about Afghanistan?
The question was on Afghanistan and Libya.
So Libya. Mr. Gaddafi is slaughtering people on the streets. Should we stay here in Canada and let it continue to happen? Do we not have a moral obligation to help people around the world?
Eric?
We need to fundamentally redesign how our military is used in Canada. We do not think, for instance, Canada should have been in Afghanistan at all. What we've done by putting NATO in Afghanistan is we've created motivation for recruitment of new Taliban fighters. Those were the wrong troops to put in Afghanistan. The moment we put them in, we were asking for trouble. If it was a UN mission, we should have used a different grouping of countries. So we made a mistake right from the beginning. And so we need to completely change our foreign policy. We need to more tightly integrate it with foreign affairs and CETA, and we need to change how we deliver foreign aid and diplomacy in the world, because we've made a terrible mistake in Afghanistan, and I worry that we're making that mistake again in Libya.
Yeah, we're going to go down the, yeah.
I won't get mad. So sorry about getting mad about having to correct. No, I would like to see our military get more involved in its traditional role as peacekeepers around the world. We have a proud record of that. It's a way in which Canada has shown leadership in the world, and I'd like to see Canada continue that. With regards to Libya, I know that we are in Libya because there was the danger of Gaddafi massacring some of the people in this country. We're in there on the doctrine of responsibility to protect. It is my concern that we make sure that we ask ourselves months from now, every month, whether we're still in there because we're there to protect some part of the population in Libya, and not simply because we haven't figured out how to leave.
Thanks. Well, I think that for most people in this room, or I hope for most people in this room, the NDP's opposition to being in Afghanistan has been clear for some time now. We've been calling for them to bring our troops home, and that has not changed at all. That has not changed at all. But what has changed is going back a few years now, when the Conservatives and Liberals of that time said, yes, we will bring them home in 2011, and what happened there? What happened is when as soon as Canadians stopped paying attention, they were worrying about other things. We ended up with an extended mission in Afghanistan, and we don't agree with that at all. I think the Conservatives and the Liberals have to own that. They went back on their word. Now, in general, I want to say about Libya, where Libya is concerned, the 3-4 parties in Parliament all sort of gave in to going over to Libya. I personally have reservations about us being there. It was the decision of our leader in our caucus at that time that we went along with that. If I was a part of the NDP caucus, I would have problems with that. And I would look to bring them up in caucus and disagree with it. I'm concerned about Libya. I'm concerned about the fact that every time the United States goes in to save someone, they stay there for 50 to 100 years. That's the problem I have with it. All right? Now, the last thing I'd like to say as time counts down is one of the things the NDP has planned to do when we take government, and it's going to happen at some point here, is produce a white paper in the first year of our government that would look at all military spending in action and review it to transition to peacekeeping again.
Thank you. Eric,
Sorry, Dan, I have to correct you. The Liberals passed a motion to withdraw from Afghanistan in 2009, and the NDP voted with the Conservatives to that motion down on the premise that we needed to leave immediately, so we couldn't leave in 2009. So what effectively happened is we're still in Afghanistan. So I have to challenge your interpretation of history.
That sounds like a bit of interpretive history to me on your part, actually. Yeah, right. Okay. I think that the policy's been rather well known, and I think that as we go on here, what we have is a situation where during this recent debate, and as things have gone on, the NDP is still the only one calling for the troops home from Afghanistan, and that's what's been happening, and that's what we're going to continue to do until it happens.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we'll go to this microphone here.
My name is Kathy Xu. I'm a Falun Gong practitioner. What I have here is a report called Bloody Harvest. If you haven't heard about it, Google it on internet. Anyway, in the past 10 years, the reports talk about in the past 10 years, the Chinese government has been slaughtering, killing Falun Gong practitioners in Chinese prison and use their organs and sell them to patients around the world. So when you look at the 2008 Olympics, you see the shining side of communism in China, but this is a continuing genocide that is going on in China on top of the 80 million people who have died under the communism regime in Beijing. So anyway, I just want to know, when you are elected into the parliament, Are you going to take up this issue and have the courage to stand up for human rights and humanity?
We'll start with Ted and then move down the table. Oh, sorry. Start with Eric. I'm sorry. Eric.
Actually, this is a horrific issue that I was made aware of about 4 years ago. It's so bad that China should have had the Olympic Games pulled. It's so bad that it's almost unbelievable that this could happen. And you know, that China's denied it. But then if you actually look at some of the statistics, you realize that in fact this was happening because foreigners were coming to China for organ transplant operations, and they were able to get the transplants within 2 weeks. So people who are in that business of organ transplants said, wait a minute, for this variety of people to be able to get a match that fast, there must be at least 5,000 people who are already matched for the organ donations. Sort of the statistics prove that point. Well, the only way they could get 5,000 people on death row was to include the Falun Gong. And our governments around the world, just couldn't handle this information. It was too horrific. So it has to be brought out. It is one of the crimes of our age that needs to be called to justice.
I totally agree with Eric on this. I was nominated, I think it was in February, and now we're in an election. I'm in a bit of a blur, and I've knocked on some doors. Did I not knock on your? I thought so. Of all the doors in Kingston, I knocked on this lady's door, and so she explained to me what was going on, and I left in shock. I was not aware of this, like Eric has been aware of it for the last 4 years. And I totally agree. I mean, I think Scott Reed in the next riding over sits on a committee, a human rights committee that is trying to move forward some changes. But I just don't know what else to say. But I would definitely talk to whoever we could talk to make some changes.
Thank you for that question. I am very hopeful that we can all find some agreement on this one, especially as we move forward. This issue has started to emerge for me over the last month, and I almost hear about it on a daily basis now. And I thank the people who are really pushing for it for being active and making sure that us as representatives know that this is happening, know how concerning it is. Now, which way will we take it as we get to Parliament? I think what we have to do is whichever one of us gets there, we have to go and meet within our caucus, start to educate other caucus members, and start to bring that we get a united message out from the parties saying that this is unacceptable. It has been unacceptable all along, and it has to stop. Now, there's going to be political pressure saying we can't make that kind of judgment on China. I think that in this case, the evidence we have and the outpouring that we've had, we have to make that kind of statement, and I'm hopeful that I will be able to do that with our caucus, the NDP caucus. Thank you.
I think the tough question to ask here is, are you willing to put Canada's economic relations at jeopardy for what you believe in? So I think for this issue, we should be doing the research and getting the evidence out there, whatever it is, whatever it turns out to be, and then not be afraid to say, look, here's the evidence as to what's going on. We cannot follow Canadian values and be silent on this. And yeah, we may have to put some of our economic interests at risk because our values, our fundamental values, are more important, and that's going to be with us whether we're rich or poor. That's what we care about. That's what Canada is. So that's the hard question we have to ask. And I think I would be willing to gather the evidence so that you can put it in front of the foreign government and say, look, here's the evidence. Our values are not compatible with this, and so we have to speak out, and we're willing to put some of our interests at risk to show that we do back up our values.
Well, we have unanimity at the table, so I'm tempted to stop right here, but I won't. So I'll go to this microphone over here.
What are you personally, or you as part of a party, going to do to increase sustainable and effective foreign aid, as opposed to, for example, sending infant formula to countries where it's not used, or untrained volunteers to construct houses that will fall apart in a couple years?
Again, that's a great question. I'll ask you to save that question for when we're on local issues. We're on foreign policy right now.
Aid?
I'm sorry.
Foreign aid? Disaster relief? Development in the third world?
I was writing something down. So we'll begin with Ted.
My experience with seeing places overseas where Canadian foreign aid has gone leads me to believe that we should be trusting Canadians that go over and work in foreign lands, trusting people on the ground as to what is really sustainable and what is working. The people that I know, my friends who've gone overseas to work and have been supported by Canadian governments or Canadian agencies, I think they knew what was going on. I think they had an understanding because they lived in the community of what the community really needed and what was sustainable. So my answer to that, based on my limited experience, is to say, have Canadians in foreign countries on the ground, understanding the communities and the cultures and the places where they live, and trust them.
Dan?
Thank you for that. I was just taking a brief look at the platform because as I read through it last night, I was trying to review this sort of section of the platform is admittedly not my strongest point. I want to refer to it just so that I'm not giving you a line and make sure that you know exactly what is in the platform for this. And the first point of it is, we will get Canada on track to fulfilling our long-standing commitment to increase our overseas development assistance, ODA budget to 0.7% of GDP, with an immediate increase of $500 million and further increases each year. That is the commitment that is within the NDP platform. That is my platform. That is the platform I subscribe to, and I would begin working on that immediately with the rest of the caucus once I get to Ottawa. All right? The second thing I'm going to say, and I want to add this into it, is, and the second part of it is we will remove bureaucratic red tape and enable Canadian pharmaceutical companies, and I'm sure I don't want to take this away from you, Beth, because I know you're going to ask about, to export generic versions of life-saving medicine for people suffering from HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and other diseases in the developing world. Those are two things we'll begin working on right away in Ottawa.
There was a G8, and out of the G8 summit, the group decided to put child and maternal health on the map. $7.3 billion has been put into that program, and Canada has put in a large amount of money to help women and children in Africa. I know that Habitat for Humanity does wonderful things. I know there's young Queen's students that come to our Rotary Club and are often asking for money to go overseas and build homes. And what I've seen from their slide presentations, they're doing a wonderful job.
I think the problem is twofold. It's the amount of money, it's also how the money is used. And I think it's true to say that it has had a mixed record. We've done some things well. We've listened to communities. We've developed programs that worked on a small scale. We've also done some things badly. And part of the problem was sometimes tied aid, where we had domestic considerations, and in sending things over there to advantage, say, Canadian companies or other concerns, we actually didn't help the situation. So it's partly our sophistication in how we do it. The problem is CETA's demoralized now. The Conservatives have virtually taken over that department, and they're going back to the old model of tied aid in terms of partisan advantage, domestic considerations. And what we saw with the document where the CETA director agreed to continue funding for Kairos, and then there was a not put in after the document was signed. That is just the tip of the iceberg of what is happening in CETA. So I think we have a lot of reason to be afraid of a Conservative majority and what they'll do for development.
For that.
Whoops. My name is Beth Pater, and I'm here to speak for an organization called the Kingston Grandmother Connection that supports the Stephen Lewis Foundation and Help Lesotho in marvelous work that they do in Africa, helping grandmothers who have lost their children or now raising their orphan children. And this is about the fact that Canada has made a clear commitment to maternal and child health in developing countries, as was said. And on March 9th, a bill, Bill C-393, was passed with the potential to save the lives of millions of mothers and their children with treatable diseases. And it was passed with the support of all the parties in the House of Commons. But this bill, which would have allowed Canada to send affordable generic medicines to developing countries, died on the order paper as a result of deliberate government delaying tactics. And it then, because of the election, was called, and so in the Senate it just was put aside. Given that a child dies every 6 seconds in developing countries because of a lack of medicines, my question is this. If elected as MP for this riding, would you support a new bill that would streamline Canada's access to medicines regime, including a one-license solution, so that Canada can meaningfully respond to the urgent need for affordable, life-saving medicines in developing countries?
Start with Dan. Dan. Oh, Dan. Dan starts.
It is, in all fairness, it is sometimes hard to tell. Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much. And I think it's important I want to recognize that was sort of one of the issues I was talking about from the platform. That was a bill that was put forward by Paul Dewar, who's a New Democrat MP in Ottawa Centre. So obviously the NDP has been supportive of this all the way along, as were all the parties, which was mercifully so, in order to make this happen. So the answer that I would give you is absolutely yes. The way it happens in general is that MPs will take turns depending on who comes up first. If I were to come up first and they were to ask me to put forward that bill, I would be happy to do so when the time comes.
Well, the bill fell because we have an election. I spoke to Senator Hugh Segal, who many of you know, who sits in the Senate, who said many Conservatives supported the bill, and he was one who supported the bill as well. When this government comes back, this bill will be back on the table, and I would support this bill. Thank you.
We consider this bill a high priority, and we would support it. You have my 100% guarantee. I am somewhat suspicious of this idea that the bill couldn't have passed the Senate, because a whole raft of other bills were quickly approved by the Senate, and this could have been one of them. And lives were on the line. It should have been approved.
I would be very happy to support this bill. Some of you may not know the background, but there was existing legislation to provide needed medicine at a low cost to developing countries. However, under the old legislation, there was probably only like a couple of shipments to one country. So this legislation was not working. It was too onerous. And this new legislation would make it easier to get to do the paperwork and get the medicines sent to the places where they were needed at a cost that people could afford. And so it makes a lot of sense. And there's no reason why everybody shouldn't support a new bill in the new House of Commons.
Go over to the other microphone.
My question concerns a campus event which is designed to influence foreign policy and protest it. I know it might be hard for a Liberal candidate to answer this question, but my question is to all of you. Do you agree with Michael Ignatieff's statement that Israeli Apartheid Week is a cocktail of ignorance and intolerance?
So I'm going to just, if you don't mind, just reframe the question to ask, what is your party's position on Israeli Apartheid Week? Is that fair? Yeah. Okay, thanks. And we'll start with Alicia.
The Harper government supports Israelis. We have, but let me tell you, on the other side of that, we have some police over on the West Bank with the Palestinians as well, trying to help them with their government issues.
The Green Party has an approach, we call it a balanced approach, that critiques both sides when they deserve it and supports both sides. We feel that that's the most constructive position. However, I will say this, I do believe universities are a place where opinions are allowed to be expressed, even opinions that you don't agree with. And that would mean Israel Apartheid Week would be acceptable as one of, even if people disagree with them, as an acceptable expression of free speech.
I think it's important to denounce hate speech and anti-Semitism wherever it is found. I believe it's important to support free speech and academic freedom, especially at our universities. And I would point out to you that the Liberal Party is the party that brought us the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we stand behind the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, freedom to assemble, freedom to speak, freedom to say whatever you want, think whatever you want. This is what the Liberal Party stands for.
I don't know if that was an answer or not. I think one of the keys is when you have an event like this, and we have politicians and talking heads making statements about it, and what you realize is that we have the media editorializing about it as well, and I think that was certainly part of the problem with it is, did anyone go to any of these events? Did anyone attend and find out what it's all about? You know, you're not going to burst in flame the moment you walk in the door. If you go and see how you feel about something, if it's disagreeable to you, you leave. Now, that's sort of where I want to get to my role in the whole thing. I was invited to attend a couple of events at Israeli Apartheid Week, and I went. I went because when I get invited to go to events in this community, I don't make snap judgments or editorialize on them until I go and see for myself. And what I want to do, I can't talk about, you know, what it's like at York or anywhere else, but the event that was run at Queen's that I attended was very respectful, was academic, was critical of foreign policy only and not people, and I thought that it was actually a credit to the discussion and free speech at this university. So would I ever go to one again? Yes, I would.
Hello? All right. I'm a Canadian citizen, but I've lived abroad my whole life. My parents have worked in NGOs in Ghana and Kenya and Sri Lanka. Over there, everyone respected Canada as a peacemaker, as a country that was diplomatic and prided in negotiations. How would you and your party work to try and regain that image of Canada as a peacemaker? And specifically, can you talk about any actual tangible progress that your party would want to make towards working more with soft power and investing in soft power, increasing our foreign service and CEDA as compared to hard power in the military? Thank you.
Eric?
Well, we put forward a very, I like to think, radical proposition. Is it on? Oh. Hello. Hello. The Green Party put forward, I think, a fairly radical resolution in its last AGM. And basically what we said was that unless NATO was prepared to meet a number of conditions, Canada should exit NATO. And I know that's, for some people, that's scary, but I'll tell you why. We cannot have a truly independent foreign policy to do the things that need to be done in this world if we're inside a NATO that acts the way it has acted in the last 10 years. We must have a NATO that has no first nuclear strike for all its members. We must have a NATO that agrees to the jurisdiction of the criminal court. And we must have a NATO that will not use landmines. If we don't have that, then we are party in the operations we do to countries which break those rules. And we cannot have respect in the world if we do not adhere to those principles. So if we can't change those countries, and obviously I'm talking about the United States, we exit NATO and we form a new alliance with other countries that are prepared to move the world forward to a new era.
Well, I think everyone knows what the conservative stance on this is. We work with our allies. That's what this party does. The world is a different place. The world is changing. Terrorism. Does anybody remember terrorism? People blowing, like, years ago? It didn't happen. It's in Ireland. But not coming to the U.S. But they're not coming to the U.S., and they're not threatening Canada. We've had threats here in Canada, folks. We have to work in consent. We have to work together with our allies who live just south of the border of Canada.
I would like to just sort of urge people to let Alicia speak, actually, because we're all equal up here. So let's do that. While I'm being so darn agreeable, I'd like to say that I agree with a lot of the things Eric said on NATO. The problem being is that it had been a long-standing NDP policy to be not part of NATO for a lot of those reasons. What we have seen, and this is, you have to be honest about your party as much as you belong to them at the same time, that is an aspect of the policy that they have fallen short of. It's sort of fallen to the back of the policy binder, and I have to say that for myself, I'm not that happy about it. But parties aren't perfect, and that's why they need people to be involved in them, and that's why policy has to be fluid and dynamic, and it builds on engagements. For me personally, I would like to see the NDP recommit to that and making NATO what it's supposed to be instead of something different, and something that is very much a hard power tool. I would be much more in favor of going to diplomacy and soft power in almost 99% of the cases. I'm not really looking forward to seeing Canadians shooting or bombing anyone, and I don't hope we never have to see it again, frankly.
The clearest evidence that Canada has lost its leadership role in the world is the fact that we didn't get a seat on the Security Council last time around. We need to regain our leadership position in the world, and it means doing things like taking leadership on climate change that we haven't done. It means not just focusing on places like Afghanistan and Libya, but focusing on international development and peacekeeping and places like sub-Saharan Africa, where we've kind of lost a bit of focus. We need to think of ourselves as Canada as a citizen of the world, as a participant in the international community. We want to regain our leadership role in the UN. And we don't want to do things like turn a little spat over landing rights with the United Arab Emirates into a full-scale diplomatic row and costing us a great relationship with another country and from a military point of view, a forward base during a time when we have troops overseas. Those are the sorts of things that we have to do to regain our leadership role. I think it's very important.
So we're out of time for that section. We're going to move on to the fourth section, which is the environment. And I will begin with a question that was posted on the Facebook page from Elizabeth Samuels, and it's as follows. It's been 1 year since the Gulf of Mexico oil spill. What are the candidates' views on offshore drilling in Canada? And we'll start with Ted.
I think it's something. Okay, here we go. Our current government has actually been thinking about loosening standards on offshore drilling. And I think it's very important, especially in our Arctic, that we ensure that we have the highest possible standards that will ensure that we don't have a spill like we had in the Gulf of Mexico. In the Gulf of Mexico, you could have people running down to the shoreline and getting in their boats and putting on their rubber boots and trying to clean things up. If there is an oil spill in the Arctic, there is nobody. There is nobody there to help with the cleanup. It is so hard to access, and the environment is so fragile up there. We should be, it makes a lot of sense to have a moratorium on offshore drilling in the Arctic until we're absolutely sure. And maybe we don't even need to drill in the Arctic. But if somebody really wants to drill there, let's make absolutely sure there's no chance of a spill. I don't even know if that can be done. And if it can't be done, we shouldn't be drilling in the Arctic offshore.
Well, this sort of did come up in the House of Commons in the last year or so, and the NDP did put forward a motion, especially when things were happening down in the Gulf of Mexico, that they halt drilling and they halt things that were going on off the coast of BC. And luckily, parliamentarians did seem to come around because it was a big item in the news at that time, and that's how sort of public awareness, tends to drive the House of Commons sometimes for the good and sometimes for the worst, I'm afraid. But as far as going forward, I would agree that I think offshore drilling is very dangerous, but I go further than that. As far as now that we're talking about environment and things like that, in that we have to stop subsidizing that kind of dirty energy consumption. We got to stop subsidizing it and start subsidizing clean energy production in this country. And I think just dealing with offshore drilling that way is just a small part of that. We need to make a transition. We have to make it very soon.
Actually, there was just a program on the television the other night about the offshore drilling issue down in the U.S., down in Louisiana. And it's amazing how much Mother Nature played a part in cleaning up a lot of the oil that was spilled there. There's still more oil there, but it is amazing how our world can clean itself. Offshore drilling in the Arctic, I really don't know anything about it. But I mean, they're not going to stop drilling for oil, but we do need to make sure that there are safety measures put into place so this doesn't happen again. I am just glad to see that Mother Nature was able to do so much good in such a bad situation.
As we slowly run out of easily available oil, we'll be taking more and more risks. We'll be drilling deeper. We'll be going in more dangerous environments. This is the reality of a world that is addicted to fossil fuels. We have to start changing that. In the interim, I can tell you, we should not allow them to drill in the Arctic. And if they do drill in the Arctic, we should insist they drill 2 wells simultaneously, not back to back at the same time. And then they can price their Arctic oil and see if it's still economic.
Hello? Okay. Hi, my name is Heather Murdoch. I'm a civil engineering student here at Queen's. I'm also one of the co-presidents of Engineers Without Borders, and my original question was about foreign aid reform, but since we moved on to the next topic, I also have a question related to the environment. So in engineering, we kind of get the opportunity to really understand sort of how like energy systems work, for example, and water systems work, and I'm particularly concerned about our water resources here in Canada. Being in sort of the hydraulic engineering side of the program. We have incredible resources here in Canada, and I think that sometimes we don't do enough to protect those. And so I'm wondering sort of what your party plans to do to protect the resources that we currently have here in Canada. And then my other question is on the energy side of things. What are you going to do to ensure that we do have a sustainable energy future here in Canada? What are you going to do to ensure that we have an integrated approach to energy production, that we're not just looking at, we're not just looking at solar power generation, for example, we're not just looking at wind, but we really do have that integrated approach to ensure that we have that sustainable energy future. And maybe just sort of one other issue that I know is, okay, sorry, okay, I won't, okay. So what are you going to do to ensure a sustainable energy future? Perhaps maybe speak to the Ontario Green Energy Act and also protect our resources such as fresh water, which we have in abundance that we're so lucky to have here in Ontario. Thank you.
There is awful lot of things there, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to all of them. I want to start with the first question, though, or the first part of it, which is water and resources in general. And I think what we've started to see, and what is the most dangerous thing we've started to see, is the privatization of those resources and the turning over of those resources to corporate interests. Now, this is something that our party and people like myself that are within the party have always been concerned about, and it's becoming more and more of a hot issue all the time, especially when it comes to drinking water. As far as just to make a blanket statement on it, is that there are issues like that, there are resources like water that I think should always be public, should not belong to anyone, and should not be bought and sold. In fact, I'm very happy that even for what we have tonight, we're not drinking it out of bottles or anything like that. Public water should be public, and I think we have to bear down on it and make sure we keep those resources public. As far as going back to I'll try to get the second part before I run out of time, and that is what I brought up earlier, which is talking about subsidies. I know we are subsidizing the oil industry very heavily. I believe we're subsidizing nuclear perpetually, and I consider those both dirty forms of producing energy. I know that there are probably nuclear fans in this room going crazy right now, but I'm not one of them. And I think what we have to do, and is creating that diversity, is take those subsidies and put them on to clean energy and put them across the spectrum, especially paying attention to which provinces might benefit from each kind.
I totally agree that we need to protect all our natural resources, our water, our forestry. We have many great natural resources in this country, and we do need to protect them. This government does care about the environment. There are things that have been done. The adoption of the Copenhagen Accord regarding to global greenhouse gas emissions, expanding our Canadian parkland. We're expanding our parklands. We're protecting our parklands. We're going to do that over the next 5 years, put in $5.5 million. $100 million over 2 years in research and development of clean energy and energy efficiency. $1.5 billion to the Canada Eco Trust for clean air and climate change. We need to cut our air pollution, and we need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions. We all know that. $250 million full-scale commercial demonstration of carbon capture. We need to capture the carbon. There are many bright minds in this room, and I know that some of you will come up with a great development that will help this environment, and I hope you're the lucky one. Thank you.
Well, we need a national water strategy with federal leadership, and I actually think we need a department that specifically focuses on water. By combining it with other with other issues, we lose the focus on water. It's a complex subject with multiple issues. One of the places we get money for this new Water Canada department would be removing the subsidy and the funding we give to nuclear. And that ties into the next question. The way we get a good energy plan in Canada is we get the prices right. We remove the subsidies everywhere. So subsidies to oil and gas and the subsidies to nuclear. And the subsidy to nuclear is not just direct cash. It's limiting the liability from nuclear accidents. If they claim that it's so safe, then go to the market and get in the insurance. Don't ask the Canadian government to give them a blank check on liability.
Canada should be working very closely with the United States since we share a lot of the water resources. In particular, Ontario should always be working in close consultation with the other states that border the Great Lakes, because we have a shared interest in things like preventing bulk water exports, in determining how the water level rises and lowers, because over the year there are competing interests. Some people want high water levels, some people want low water levels. The ecosystem needs water levels that fluctuate over the year. Those kinds of questions need to be talked about, and we need to keep in contact with the U.S. states. As far as a sustainable energy future, I would say that in this election, the best thing you can do here in Kingston and the islands is to send to Ottawa the person who has been working for the last 3 years in sustainable energy, has been leading the effort to make this area a center for sustainable energy by working with businesses, by bringing green energy jobs to this area. If you want the person who actually works in the area, send me to Ottawa to be your member of Parliament.
Eric, you had a rebuttal, and then Dan.
Well, I've been working in this field for 30 years, so send me to Ottawa. The problem, the Liberals had, I have to say, a great leader in Stéphane Dion. He understood that the green tax shift is how we drive our economy towards sustainability. And when they got rid of him, because he was too visionary for them, we lost a really important advocate for the green tax shift. That is how we get a green economy. We change how we price the things we buy and make to reflect the true environmental cost. That's reality-based decision-making. That's evidence-based decision-making. And I would like to ask Ted whether he stands up for a carbon tax or not, because it is critical to the future green energy of this country.
I think Dan is next, and then you can have a rebuttal.
I think what I wanted to add to that, and I appreciate what Eric just said, is that Michael Ignatieff, this is the other problem that we have. We have a leader of the Liberal Party who has gone on record on a number of times saying that he is in favor of the tar sands and subsidizing the tar sands. This does not sound like a party to me that is interested in being sustainable, and no matter what Ted is prepared to do, if the leadership isn't there, if the party will isn't there, then that's not going to happen.
Well, I want to correct Dan. Michael Ignatieff has not been in favor of subsidizing the tar sands. And second of all, if you want to talk about leadership, elect the leader. Send the leader to Ottawa. That's me. Oh, sorry. Let me answer Eric's question about pricing. What I believe, there are different mechanisms for putting a price on pollution. I do believe that that is what we need to do. But there are different mechanisms. The principle, however, is to make sure that the polluter pays a price. There's a moral reason for that. There's an economic reason for that. The moral reason for that is it's simply not fair if you pollute and you make everybody else pay the price. Second, the economic reason, if you make the effort to use less fossil fuels or to pollute less in general, you should have an incentive. You should be rewarded for doing that. Otherwise, you're not going to do it. And that is also behind putting a price on pollution.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Carlin. I'm actually visiting from U of T, but I'm impressed. So my question is, in Canada, but especially in Ontario, what historically attracted companies to Ontario was not excessively low corporate taxes, but rather low energy costs. And two of the candidates so far have highlighted that they feel that nuclear is not a tenable energy source or acceptable in our society. And so my question is, how would you meet our energy demands in a realistic way and also ensure that, we've been talking about social policies and social issues, but energy costs for citizens is also critical. So what is your realistic energy plan? I guess is my question.
Well, I'm not a nuclear scientist, so I can't report on nuclear energy, but I have talked to different people from RMC who are, and they're quite comfortable with nuclear energy. So we have to believe in our experts and what they tell us. This government has put in an eco-retrofit program for people in their homes. $5,000 credit to people who want to make their homes more energy efficient. I think this is a great program. It was in the last budget and it is now continuing on. Also, a rebate of up to $2,000 to buyers of fuel-efficient vehicles. I actually took part in that program and bought myself a hybrid about 4 years ago. Actually, it was the Camry was very reasonable. It was under $30,000. I didn't get the loaded model. And on the green levy, there's a green levy on new fuel inefficient vehicles. There's a green levy on those. So this government is trying to encourage more development of energy efficient vehicles. $36 million over 2 years for scrappage programs to get the older vehicles off the road. Another great program.
Well, we would certainly phase out nuclear power responsibly. Unfortunately, Ontario, as one province, has 50% of its electricity generated by nuclear. So we can't overnight shut them down. We would phase them down slowly as they did in Germany. If we change the prices, I believe the prices in which we pay for carbon pollution, I believe we begin to incentive other forms of energy use. There are other things we could be looking at that we're not even looking at seriously now, like deep well geothermal, as well as better using our hydro and wind in balance. A German minister came and he looked at Ontario's wind and he looked at its hydro and he said, "Why aren't you tying those two closer together?" We would love to have the hydro storage capacity that you can use in tandem with wind. Obviously, wind has to be done very carefully. We have not done a good job in how we've erected our wind towers. The setback, we started with 350 meters, and then we went to 450. We should have been at a kilometer. You know, we have a lot of land in Canada. We need to get some of these things right, or we will create a backlash for renewable energy. Solar power is another potential. Imagine the money. Imagine if we put the money we put in nuclear into solar panel research and other renewable energy technologies. This is where we need to go, and if we get the prices right, this is how we incentive innovation.
If you talk to the experts and you do a little bit of research, they will tell you that we have to have a very diverse set of energy sources. It cannot be just solar. It cannot be just wind. And if you do the math and do some research, you find it has to be some solar, some wind, some bioenergy, some geothermal, coupled with energy efficiency. And then we need some transition fuels. We need to use natural gas instead of coal for a few decades to get us over the hump. We need to fully price the cost of nuclear energy, including the decommissioning, the waste disposal, and the risk. And so, as Eric said, we are stuck in Ontario with nuclear energy for the next little while because half of our electricity comes from nuclear energy. So the important thing is diverse sources. But I want to mention another thing that's very important in the long term. And it's important because of what Eric says. We have to price pollution. We have to deal with poverty in order to so that we can get over this hump into new forms of energy. Renewable energy costs money. And if you try to put in the price, different parts of society, some parts of society can handle the price change and some parts can't. And if you want to have the political will to get everybody on board with pricing pollution and dealing with higher energy costs and being able to find the energy sources for the second half of the 21st century, we need to deal with poverty, because if we don't deal with poverty, we won't have the political will to change how we use energy.
Thank you, Carlin. I just think in general for this question, I don't want to belabor it because there's sometimes when you have four people up here, we all do tend to find some kind of consensus, and well, at least 3 out of 4 usually do. But What it comes down to is that it has to be replaced with balanced sources. And we have to balance it out. And the nuclear issue is going to be, we are going to carry it for a while, just like though we're always carrying that cost on our hydro bill every month. What is that debt repayment part of our hydro bill that we look at every month, but the cost of keeping our nuclear power plants running? So, I mean, one way or another, we are paying for it, and we're going to have to try to, but, you know, the answer is not to build 8 to 20 more of them and make sure that we're paying for them, you know, infinitely. Just to add to that, I want to sort of comment on what Alicia said about the Eco Retrofit program. This was, I believe, a very good program, and yes, the Conservative government did create it. It worked, and it was helpful. And I think that they do need some credit for that, and we are, for the NDP, are looking to bring it back permanently. The problem is when the Conservatives initially brought it in, they brought it in as an election promise to win an election, and then after a year they got rid of it. Then when it's election time again, it comes back. So that's the problem I have with that.
I think, Ted, you wanted a rebuttal to that?
I wanted to comment on a couple of things that were mentioned about the Eco Energy Retrofit program. This is a program that I'm intimately familiar with because I worked with the businesses that were affected by it. And this is a program, when the Conservatives come in, they cut support for energy retrofits in homes. And then they brought it back. And then they cut it again. And they brought it back. And if you work with the businesses, as I have, you know that you can't run a business that way when policy is changing. And you can't lay off people and bring them back, especially when they have this special skill of doing energy audits for houses. So if you want an MP who understands that reliable policy is very important for business to get on board and help us transition to a renewable energy future, send me to Ottawa and you'll have an MP who understands that.
Okay.
Hello. Hi there, my name's Ben, and I was just wondering if each candidate speaking to their track record could explain why they would be the best representative for Kingston, the House of Commons, on an environmental front.
We'll start with
Eric. I guess a couple years after I graduated from Queen's, I helped start an environmental group in Kingston called the Kingston Environmental Action Project, and essentially spent 10 years working in that field, reading policy, understanding environmental issues, then continued making documentary films. So this is something that's very close to my heart. I think the most important thing we need from an MP is someone who can creatively problem solve for some of the problems we face in the environment, in society, in the economy. I'm also a small businessman, so I bring that skill set. The challenges we face will require somebody who understands these issues from early on. So I believe I have that skill. Thank you.
The Conservative government has put $400 million in new and additional climate change financing to the Fast Start Fund. This government is committed to help the environment. And if elected, I would vote on climate change emissions to be lowered, programs like the program we're talking about, putting new furnaces in, maybe doing other home renovations that help with energy costs. As Canadians, I think it's important that we all help the environment. Each one of us here in this room can make changes that will help the environment. And they may be small changes. I know I make them by driving a hybrid, by doing little things in my own home. And we all have to play a part in the environment. It's not just the government. It's not just about the government. It's also about everyone sitting here. And I'm not an expert on the environment. I have not had 30 years in the field. I'm a businesswoman. We own 2 companies, and that's my background. Thank you.
Well, that is a tough question unless you're carrying around a certain amount of street cred, isn't it? It sounds a little bit loaded. Thank you, though. I appreciate it. I'm sure Alicia and I appreciate that. However, what I would turn you to, though, is a track record instead of involvement, attendance, listening, consultation. These are things that I've been doing for the last 19 months. What they mean is, frankly, MPs are asked to know a lot. As even standing up here, we're supposed to be authorities on everything. Frankly, it's a little bit unfair. And it's just not going to happen. But what we have to be good at, what we have to be the best at, is listening to making sure we identify which groups and which sort of sources are the best sources of information for us. We have to be engaged, and we have to be very hardworking to go out and get that information and make sure we implement it. Those are things that I do have a track record of doing in this community. It doesn't have to involve any kind of specialized talent other than the specialized talent to go after it, to be very hardworking, listen to people, and make things happen. That's what I do.
As it's scientists who are telling us that we cannot continue to abuse our natural environment. And as somebody with a scientific background who's done research, published 25 papers, I'm the guy who will say, we have to face the truth. And here's the evidence. I have a business background as well, and I know how global forces work and how they affect things in Kingston. I've also been active locally. I've been the co-chair of the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum, which is a city council appointed committee. I put the energy meters in the library. I researched and wrote a report on Kingston's greenhouse gas emissions footprint and how it changed from the year 2000 to 2006. And in the last few years, I've been an executive director of an organization called Switch, which is a not-for-profit working to get local businesses in the green energy area thriving and hiring and growing. And creating a whole community of businesses and researchers and educators and farmers and students, and getting them to work together to make this area a center for sustainable energy. I want to make this country a leader in sustainable energy, and I can do it.
This will be our last question on environment.
Okay, right now Denmark has the ability to do 38% of their energy capacity through alternative energy, and over the last 5 years they have not been able to reduce their carbon emissions at all. So almost 40% can be done through alternative energy. The problem is they can't turn the sun on, they can't tell the wind when to blow, and they can't tell the tides when to come in. What is going to be your government's policy to ensure that when Canadians go to the light switch and flick it on, there's affordable energy that's actually there for Canadian families, that doesn't put them in the poorhouse to pay for it?
We'll start with Ted.
What I don't want to do is put the rest of the world in the poorhouse because we are burning coal and imposing a burden on the rest of the world and future generations. Listen, to get to more practical matters, I mentioned previously that we need to use natural gas as a transition fuel. Coal is very dirty and polluting and contributes a lot to climate change. We will need natural gas as a transition fuel because until we find out better, more efficient ways of storing energy from the wind and the sun, and we will, because we're investing in research in storing energy. Until we do that, we'll need natural gas as a transition fuel, and I think that's one of the main things that you have to plan for. We do have natural gas in this country. Natural gas is not that expensive at the moment, but you really have to ask, what is the total cost? And if you look at burning coal, the total cost of that, the mining, the pollution, healthcare costs, the effect on climate change and ocean acidification, it's just not morally justifiable to not do something about burning coal. We have to stop. And we can use natural gas as a replacement, and at some point in the future, we'll have better energy storage, and we'll be able to rely more on things like solar and wind power.
Continuing to dump carbon into the atmosphere is the most expensive thing we can do in terms of the future cost to the economy. The people who will suffer the most are those who have the least resources to escape the impacts of that, and that will be the poor. So by going to a green energy future, we actually help the most vulnerable. We don't hurt them. And if by any chance there's a pro-nuclear argument embedded in your question, what I have to say is this, and what Einstein said: nuclear is a hell of a way to boil water. And if you're going to boil water for electricity, then let's look at other ways of doing it. The cost of deep well geothermal is about the same as a nuclear power plant. That's very expensive, but I'd rather do that than nuclear power. And if you want to know how absurd it gets, Japan could have made a decision in the 70s to go to geothermal power, instead went to nuclear. So that's the kind of problem in decision making we have in this country. And their volcanic activity was on the surface. They had 100 sites close to the surface that they could have tapped.
Thanks for the question. I'm going to sort of go back to what I said originally, because there's not a lot to add, I think, at this point. We already talked about getting energy from diverse sources. Hello? Is there a statement there? The only thing we have to go back to diversity and having things come from different places, and developing that diversity through it. The one thing we didn't sort of mention in all that, though, is our hydroelectric power, and that is power that really does. We have a lot of it. And not only do we have a lot of it, but when you look at Ontario, there have been things done with other provinces as far as the way Ontario could work with Quebec, to make sure that we share some hydroelectric power with them. Nova Scotia is looking to develop some hydroelectric power of its own. These are things that perhaps Denmark did not have, and it's going to be a more stable thing. And I think that the combination of all those things across the spectrum, if the provinces work together and the federal government is an honest broker in that, we can make that work, and there won't be any, that moment when you flick the lights and nothing happens.
How do you keep it all affordable?
I think from what the guys have said so far, and what I'm saying right now, is it's not affordable in the future if we don't make the change now.
The last word on this question, Alicia? You have the last word on this question. And the question was around affordable energy. How would you make energy affordable?
Well, I know there's different programs out there, and this one that the Conservative government has put out in 2008, it extended the HST relief to land leased to stimulate wind or solar power equipment. And I think that's great for farmers if they have land, that they can have solar panels on their land, which makes it affordable for the farmers. We've got the windmills over on Wolf Island that we know is a provincial initiative. But the farmers that have windmills on their land are actually making money, and it's quite great for them, because farming can be very difficult at times. So I think that's wonderful. That's affordable to the farmers. And
much. We are out of time on that topic, and we're going to move to our final topic of the night, which is local politics and candidate platforms. So those people I sent away earlier, you may want to get to the microphone earlier, Kevin. But let me start with a question that I think sent to me through Twitter that gets at a really important issue, and that is an issue around working together. And the question comes from Dan Shapanik, who asks, if you were not running and could not support your own party, which candidate would you endorse and why? Daniel Beals, we'll start with you.
That's such an awesome question, actually. I have to say, and maybe you've seen a little bit up here, but I have a natural distrust of both of these who claim to be governing parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives. If I were to not be in the position where I could run, I think I would probably lend my support to Mr. Walton over here.
And I would have to agree, and not just because you're my neighbor, Eric, but I've been listening to your responses on the environment, and you clearly have a lot of knowledge in that area. And I would pick you, Eric.
Well, I have to say, vote for me. No, I have to say I've been extremely impressed with Dan. He has come so far in such a short time. I think he has a natural talent, and I think the fact that his father was a minister is reflected in his ability to speak from the heart. So I would support him.
I would, Dan, I think you would get my vote, and here's why. It's not because I love your policies, and there's some good ones, there's other ones that I don't agree with, but what I respect about you is that you have put in a lot of work, and I know that it's really hard what you've done. You've put in a lot of work, you've knocked on a lot of doors, you've attended a lot of events, and you've spent a lot of hours away from your family. And I respect that. I respect that. Having gone through the process myself, I really respect that.
I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll go over there.
Is that working? Okay, so we are all consumers. We all buy things. Okay. So how have you, in your personal life and through your campaign, how do you allocate your consumption decisions to support the local economy? And as an MP, what will you do to strengthen the Kingston economy?
Actually, I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat it again?
So the question is, how do you, both in your personal life and through your campaign, support the Kingston economy through where you buy things? And as an MP, what steps will you take to further support and grow the Kingston economy?
Okay, thanks. Let's start with Alicia.
Well, I think that small business is the key to any local economy. So we need to get more small businesses coming here to Kingston. We need to get a kickstart entrepreneur type program for students that are graduating, have them stay here in Kingston, give them some money that will help kickstart a business so they can employ 5, 10 people. And so we know that small business is the heart of the economy. Also, on my consumption side, we have an online auction company. So it's a green company because what we do is we sell items from homes that are actually used items. And you can go online and purchase them. We sell for estates and people who downsize. So from a consumption point of view, everything in my home is used.
We've committed to a carbon neutral campaign, so we will be buying offsets for any amount of carbon we produce, and we don't produce a lot because we have a central location. Many of us bus and cycle. We've committed to full recycling. We buy, in terms of my personal life, I've decided to walk the talk, and I'm investing in a co-op that will be consolidating local foods and that will be able to help farmers to have a consolidated source to sell to other merchants and institutions. I'm also, I have to say, I also bought a hybrid car. But I'll tell you, when gas went to $1.50, and actually we're getting close to that, they did a calculation where they compared the hybrid to the non-hybrid, and it actually saves you quite a bit of money to have the hybrid. It pays for the additional cost. And so I think we're going there where eventually every car will be a standard feature. So that's certainly one thing. And in terms of home, we do all the traditional things in terms of recycling, energy efficiency, water consumption. We try as much as possible to walk the talk.
I think the biggest way that I've supported the local economy is something that I mentioned before, working as the executive director of the Switch, the Sustainable Energy Association, and working with the 40 or 50 businesses as well as educators and students and farmers, helping their businesses grow and hire. And as the Member of Parliament, I think my role to help strengthen the Kingston economy is to be an ambassador, to explain to companies that, or any other organizations that want to locate here, that we have a central location between Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and the U.S. border. We have a very well-educated workforce, an extremely well-educated workforce, and we have a high quality of life here in Kingston. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that the Member of Parliament can do for the local economy.
This is a bit of a tough question because it sort of forces you to sort of try to toot your own horn a little bit. So I will say that in our family, we do get all our meat from John's Deli, that is local meat, and we do get all of our produce from one of the local small business farms north of the city, as well as my wife has her own garden in the back, and we're very lucky. We have an apartment, and our apartment actually has a little garden in the back. But I'd love to take all the credit in the world for that, but I have to say, in most of these things, I have to give all the credit in the world to my wife, who is actually far more visionary than I am in that. And here, I'm off and off at events and running around and doing all the things I do. I don't want to take all the credit for that. I want to make sure she gets that credit. She's also the one that makes me turn off the water every time I brush my teeth. She's the one who makes sure that I shave with turning the water off. So I don't want to just take that credit. As far as what I would do for small business in this city, and then for sort of moving the economy forward, I work for a small business right now it's called St. Lawrence Cruise Lines. The two things I would like to do is, I discussed it earlier, is we lower small business taxes from 11% to 9%, try to promote our economy that way and more jobs. But the other thing I'm sort of very interested in is the way credit card fees affect small businesses right now. There's a lot of credit card gouging, and some small businesses are really crippled under the weight of it right now.
Kevin.
Well, there we are. So my question has a little bit to do with history as well as local politics. Traditionally, minority parliaments have been some of the most fruitful times for bringing forward meaningful policy changes. Unfortunately, over the last little while, we've seen a minority parliament that's brought forward fairly little in absolute legislation passed. I'd like to ask the candidates why you believe that's happened and what you would do as an elected representative from Kingston to make sure that the next parliament functions in a way that brings forward meaningful policy that affects the lives of everyone in the room. Thank you.
We'll start with Eric.
Well, minority parliaments can work. We saw Lester Pearson's minority government work very well to pass very important legislation. The key thing is you have to not imagine that you're a majority government when you have a minority status. And unfortunately, this government has. And all it's worked on is trying to get a majority. So it's not interested in cooperating or making Parliament work. It's interested in very narrow partisan advantage. And unfortunately, that does not mean cooperation with the other parties. So in other words, we don't have an effective government. What we need is to change who is in government so we go back to the more cooperative type of governments we used to have.
This Conservative government put in its budget something for everyone. And again, we were in a recession close to the 1930s. Our economy is top in the G7. We have to stay the path. We can't take a U-turn. We need a majority Conservative government so we can actually get some things done. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. I think, expanding, it's not as simple as simply, changing out the government. We've had a couple different kinds of governments over time, and we've had some of these problems with all of them. We have that problem with our provincial Liberal government right now, I believe, where they really don't listen very much at all. But what I want to talk about is sort of a return to grassroots policy making. And that's something that I've sort of thrown myself into as a representative in the city so far, in which one of the main things that we see, and we see it in the way the prison farms has been handled in Kingston, we see it in the way corrections does business, we've seen it in different industries in the way this government bullies people. But what is happening is policy is coming from on high and simply coming down on the community. There's no consultation, there's no process where the community that's affected by this policy ever gets to speak their mind or be consulted on how it's going to affect them. We need to start building policy on the ground again. We need to start building grassroots policy. That means the service organizations and people that work on the front lines, us as policy decision makers and representatives have to go to them, figure out how we do it well. We have to go to our community, listen to them, and start building policy from the ground up again. And then maybe we can have a more responsive government that actually listens first and then builds it from the community out.
Before
I have here a 2004 Conservative Party door-to-door flyer, and it's called Minority Parliaments. You have to listen to this. Minority parliaments give opposition parties a unique opportunity to influence decision-making in Canada's government. The Liberals will no longer be able to stifle dissenting opinions by shutting down debates. This means that your priorities will finally be heard, respected, and represented in Parliament. That's a Conservative government publication. I have a new word for the English language. When you add a politician with hypocrisy, that new word is harpocracy.
All right. I believe that we need a government that is not permanently campaigning, and that's what we've had in the last 5 years. We need a government that chooses to actually govern, and in order to govern, it has to cooperate with the other parties. And that's what we had in a Liberal government under Lester Pearson that brought in the universal health care and the Canada Pension Plan and the flag. That's what we have to return to, and I think the best way to return to that is to elect a Liberal government. And maybe it's probably going to be a minority government, but a Liberal government will try to govern and will, by necessity, will cooperate with the other parties on an issue-by-issue basis to get things done for Canada.
So we'll go to the microphone over there.
Talking about majority governments. And let's vision this scenario where Alicia gets her wish, a majority Conservative government. Prime Minister Harper has been very clear that he would not engage in any social issue revisionism. However, what if a private member's bill comes from a Conservative backbencher, social Conservative, and all of your leaders say it's a free vote? So the issues are, how would you vote on a private member's bill on recriminalizing abortion, reinstating capital punishment, and banning same-sex marriages?
Okay, Ted, we'll start with you.
I'll vote no, no, no.
I have a hard time believing that. I guess if we did have a government like that, it could come up. I hope it doesn't come up. But the policy of the NDP, those three things would be what I would call the word sacrosanct. We would absolutely never, no NDP member of Parliament would ever use a free vote to ever go back in time to an uncivilized time on any of those issues.
I would vote no, no, no. And this government is not even going to go there. This government is focused on the economy, on jobs, and on lower taxes. We are not out of this recession. We are not out of this recession. When you graduate, you will want jobs. You will want to work. And if we don't stay focused on this economy and keep creating jobs, I mean, we don't pay for any social programs after that. But I would vote no, no, no.
In fact, the Harper government can have it both ways. They can say they won't bring up the legislation, but we saw with the long gun registry, they have a private member's bill, they bring it up, they have a free vote, and they get their way or not. In that last case, it was very, very close. And of course they'll do it in the other things with the majority government. Their backbenchers have been waiting for 8 years for the moment. If they get a majority, you're for sure there's going to be a private member's bill. And I'm glad that Alicia has stated her position, but I think we have to do everything possible to ensure they don't win a majority, because I think those three things are at risk. And absolutely the Green Party would oppose all three of those, and we would work very hard to educate Canadians as to why they would be the wrong things to do.
Concerns something that's both federal and local, because it concerns democracy, the state of democracy in this country. It hasn't been brought up tonight, and not really, and to me it's the elephant in the room. It's the elephant in this election. We've seen some things in the past that have concerned people, and I think they've frightened some of us. And the potential is very frightening, possibly. We've seen a government that fires agency heads when they give advice that the government doesn't want to hear. We've seen a government that's abolished the long-term census, so we're going to have a government in which information will not be available to people, so they can govern by ideology and opinion of their own. That's what we're worried about. A government that shuts down Parliament, our Parliament, when the going gets tough. A government that refuses to give Parliament information it needs to govern, such as costs of things, the thing about the Afghan detainees, all that. They just stonewall even when rulings are against them by the Speaker of the House. So I want to know this. This is perilous for democracy, I feel. I want to know of the candidates, what are you going to do to assure we have a government, as we were promised by Mr. Harper, that is transparent, open, responsive to people, that listens to opinion other than its own.
So if I can just, again, tweak that question slightly to say, what's your party's position on transparency, responsiveness, and listening to other parties? Daniel.
Well, I admire, the passion you showed in that speech. But these things, transparency and responsiveness, these are things that we have been campaigning on this whole election, especially in this particular riding. I spoke last night at a Cogeco debate and said that really, and I can't say it enough to you, that what we're talking about is policy coming from the people again, and policy that actually involves our community again. All these things, the bullying tactics that you're talking about, they are an example of when power becomes centralized at the top. And when it becomes centralized at the top, it's problematic and it simply flows downhill. Sorry. What we have to do, and I'm going to say it again, is start to look at each other and look around our community and try to build our policy again together. Bring that policy to us. Engage us as representatives. Take a role in your democracy again. What are we going to do? We're going to urge everyone in this room and everyone around the city from this point forward to get involved in their own democracy and to make sure that they have a seat at the table of how we make decisions. That's what I plan on doing. My door will always be open for things like that, and I want to be accessible to a fault to make sure that when policy is made and when my voice sounds out, it's informed by the community.
Our last member here in Kingston and the Islands was our Speaker of the House, Mr. Peter Milliken. And he charged the Conservatives with contempt. Well, then the Conservatives provided all the documentation. The other parties didn't even bother to have a look at the documentation, read it over. Instead, let's call another election, a $300 million election. The documents were provided after Mr. Milliken said, please provide them. They were provided. Nobody even took the time to look at them because the other parties, they were ready to call an election. And here we are in an election. $300 million of taxpayers' money.
The Harper government claimed that they would be open, accountable, transparent. What we have seen is one of the most secretive, non-accountable, and opaque governments in the history of Canada. That is the key. Take whatever they say and and it's the complete opposite. That's the key to the government. So what else did they say? They said they would stand on guard for Canada. Okay, now we know they won't stand on guard for Canada. They're all about deep integration with the United States to make Canada in the model of the United States. Now we figured out how they work. They say they do the exact opposite of what they say to win votes.
What a Liberal government will do, I'm very happy to say, is a large section in our platform. It's called the Open Government Initiative. What we will do is restore the long-form census. We will post information about access to information requests to make sure that so people can see if they are being delayed. We will also post information about government spending and grants and where they're going and how much is being spent in different places. We will make it easier to vote, and we will start to implement internet voting, beginning with our embassy and overseas military staff. We will make it easier to vote and easier for people to be engaged, because ultimately, if you want to stand on guard for democracy, it requires that people, average citizens, pay attention and get engaged and vote. And making it easier for people to vote is a good step in that direction.
I have a rebuttal. Mr. Ignatieff's attendance record in the House of Commons, he gets paid to do his job. So if he is paid to do that job, then he should be there doing that job. So do you want to elect Mr. Ignatieff, who doesn't even go to work?
Well, you're exactly right, Alicia, and his record was horrible. However, that wasn't what I was getting up to say, but Michael Ignatieff did skip out on a lot of these votes. Whenever there was a tough vote in the House of Commons, he didn't show up. Neither did half the caucus. You know, we have to recognize that when we're going on and thinking about how great a new Liberal government will be. These guys shy away from tough decisions. You've got bullies on one side and cowards on the other. That's really what we've got. All right? Okay. What I really wanted to add, though, I didn't want to talk about that. I actually wanted to talk about some of the cuts that were made to women's programs and status of women in this country, because I'm worried that we won't talk about it if we run out of time. And I want to recognize that we need to restore status of women to a full ministry again, and we need to restore pay equity. Those things were removed by this government. That's what we need to bring back. I can't let this night go if we don't talk about that.
Feel I'm making a dangerous play here by using up my last red piece of paper. But good thing is I get to kill two birds with one stone. Listen, Michael Ignatieff has been on a lot of private members' bills. He hasn't voted because he doesn't want to put pressure on the members of his caucus on which way they want to vote. So he has sat out a lot of no's, and he has also gone around the country in the last year in order to allow Canadians to ask him questions so that he can provide real answers to those questions. This has been really valuable for the Canadian people to know what the Liberal Party believes in, and you can see it in the platform, what we believe in, and I hope that I am very pleased with what's in the platform, and I'm very proud to be able to stand up and say here that I'm the candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada.
There is one thing that I felt very important to say tonight, and that's something that happened a couple of months ago. There was a really critical bill in Parliament called C-300, the Corporate Social Responsibility Act, which would have made mining corporations working overseas accountable for what they did. All three parties helped defeat that bill. That was a crucial bill. People came from mining communities around the world to watch it pass because it had passed 2 readings. It was a Liberal backbencher that did it. And Michael Ignatieff stayed away with 8 other MPs. There were 4 NDP MPs and all the Conservatives. And they destroyed a crucial piece of legislation which would have protected vulnerable people around the world. And for that, all 3 parties should be ashamed.
We have time for 2 more questions, and then we're going to go to closing statements. So the second last question will be over here.
Okay. I believe democracy is a very pertinent issue during this election, and so I think all the leaders need to be held accountable. I'm particularly concerned about Michael Ignatieff, who has recently written, or who has written, a number of papers supporting the use of torture during combats. I was wondering, how do you feel knowing that a man who is trying to take 24 Sussex Drive has the same opinion of waterboarding as George W. Bush?
And we'll start with Alicia.
I'm sorry, but I don't know anything about that, so I can't answer that question. Thank you.
I think Ignatieff has to be held accountable for giving academic cover to the American government when they were planning the invasion of Iraq and for the kind of violations to American rights. And to say, well, it was just theory, I was just talking, hypothetical, that was at a crucial time when the American public were trying to mobilize against an American president who was violating fundamental constitutional rights and principles of justice and fairness around the world. And Michael Ignatieff was one of his supporters through academia, and he should be held accountable for that because people really suffered from his actions.
Ted or Dan?
Well, I do obviously think that, this is becoming a recurring pattern with Mr. Ignatieff, is that he tends to say one thing and then a couple of years later, it could be 5 years later, he'll do another. What I am concerned about him is does he live his politics? Does he really believe what he's selling? And, we could have a situation if this election doesn't go the way he wants it to, where he might be back in academia again, writing those kinds of papers again, because that's what was paying his rent at that time. So I'm very concerned, and I think he does have to own up to it, and he does have to answer for it.
I think it's a wild exaggeration to compare Michael Ignatieff to George W. Bush. It's a wild exaggeration. And you know what? The guy has thought about what he said, and he realizes that he changed his mind. And what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? He's a guy who listens to people and changes his mind. That's what we do at universities. We make mistakes, we learn from them, and we become better people, we understand more. I've made a lot of mistakes in my time, and I made a lot of them at universities, and that's how I learned.
Aha, I had the last rebuttal. The difference would be, when you're the leader of a party and when you're want to be the leader of a country, you cannot acquire this reputation of changing your mind all the time. It makes people nervous. It makes me very nervous. And I think as we move forward, he has to really answer for some of that. Here, we even had a situation, and I'm going to bring it up again. It doesn't give me any great pleasure, Eric, I appreciate your help, but I'm doing okay by myself. No, what we had is Michael Ignatieff came to Kingston a short while ago. He made a statement on the prison farms. He said he would have to consider it. It wasn't a positive, full-on statement. Then 2 days later, he released a press release after an outpouring of anger to say that he does support it then. That's within 2 days. What's going to happen within 2 months from now or 2 years from now?
I did say there would be 2 more questions, but I sense... yeah, so I was about to say, I see a lot of questioners over there, and I'm going to give the last question over here, and then I'll allow for the candidates for closing statements.
Okay. Just, I guess, a follow-up clarification for that question. Could all the candidates provide their party's stance on the prison farms in Kingston?
Nope. Yeah. We'll start with Eric. Yeah.
Well, we would reopen the prison farms and we'd upgrade them to organic, state-of-the-art operations with renewable energy. We think that's the future of good rehabilitation. In fact, in the United States, they are putting those in. So to have closed them was a huge mistake. It represented an ideology-based prison reform agenda and not evidence-based. So the prison farms, fortunately, the genetic stock has been protected. The land is still there. We can bring them back, but we need a change of government.
19 years ago, we farmed. Due to economics, we had to sell our farm. Prison farms, $4 million are lost a year in the prison farm program. We have to look at economics. So now we need to focus on what are the rehabilitation programs that these inmates need. What they need are rehabilitation programs. What they need is education, a bare minimum of a grade 10 education. They need skills like carpentry, level 1 and 2, which they can take at St. Lawrence College and actually get a piece of paper. They leave Kingston and they go back to their hometown, which is Toronto and area. So they need skills that will get them a job once they leave Kingston.
Well, it has been in... Oh, sorry, where'd that young lady go? I want to... Hi there. It has been and it continues to be our priority to reopen the prison farms, but I'm going to, it's something that I've worked on personally for 2 years now, and I'm very passionate about it. In fact, I'm passionate enough that it's sort of fueled by the fact that there are a lot of people in this community that refuse to let this issue go, and when they refuse to let it go, that means that I am on board. I am on board, and we're going to refuse to let it go together. But I want to go a little bit further because the question was actually about sort of what is the party policy. And when I looked, if you look in all the platforms, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that renewing the prison farms isn't in any of the platforms. Okay, but I think that's significant, and I think that is it in yours? Good. That is really good. It should be. I think as we move forward, though, the key is, and what we've been able to obtain in Kingston, is in dealing with the federal NDP, what they've told us is developing this policy and renewing the prison farms is something that I, as an MP, can do in the future. They have turned it over. We're talking about what MPs can do, what kind of power they have, and what I want to do is when we are involved here is we get together, we do consult with the community, and the community helps us and helps the NDP build that policy to renew the prison farms and reopen them.
The Liberal Party promises to reopen the prison farm when we form the new government, and I will be personally accountable for that. This policy was explained by Mark Holland, who stood up in the House of Commons and pledged to do that. We put out a press release. Now, when Michael Ignatieff came here, he's got 1,000 things on his mind. He did use the words, we'll look at opening the prison farms. But what happened after that? We contacted his office and said, no, our policy is that we promise to reopen the prison farms. And immediately, the next day, they put out a press release saying our policy is we will open the prison farms. And if you want a member of parliament who commands respect in his party leader's office, then I'm your member of parliament. We have sway in our leader's office. I can't say the same thing about the other candidates here.
I think that was a little overblown.
So we'll now conclude with closing statements. And the closing statements will be in the reverse order that we began. So Eric Walton will go first, Ted Hsu second, Alicia Gordon third, and Daniel Beals will have the final statement. They have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I believe this is a watershed election for Canada because a critical question needs to be answered now and not in the distant future. How will Canada respond to the growing threat of rapid climate change? I know this issue has not been on the election front burner, but that does not make it any less critical. Not when there is solid peer-reviewed science that tells us we are experimenting with the planet to see how far we can warm it before we tip into runaway climate change. At which point, it won't matter what we do in terms of preventative action. I believe the challenge of climate change is the issue around which we must frame this election. If we continue with non-action, the consequences will dramatically undermine all the other priorities we talked about tonight. My Liberal and NDP opponents have proposed a cap-and-trade plan to price carbon emissions. But a cap-and-trade plan will not work as a standalone program without a base carbon price. In Europe, cap-and-trade has been plagued by over-allocation of permits, windfall profits, and price volatility. The Green Party's revenue-neutral green tax shift, reducing taxes on income while increasing pollution charges, continues as our central economic plank. Using the markets this way to guide us to sustainability is the best hope we have for change in time. If you are headed for a cliff, it does not matter whether you get into a red car, a blue car, or an orange car. I hope you caught the illusion, yeah. Driven at different speeds. Just don't get in. There are better options. One of those better options is the Green Party streetcar. Climb aboard. Vote Eric Walton on May 2nd. Thank you.
Ted, you're next.
I wanted to conclude just by answering the question, why are you running? Why did you get involved in politics? And I really started to think about public policy during the 3 years that I took off to be a stay-at-home dad. And my wife went to do graduate work, get her master's. And during that time, I started to think about the future of our young daughter that I was taking care of. And, on a daily basis, I could feed her and clothe her and read to her. But there are dark clouds in the horizon, and you can see these dark clouds, the financial debts that we have, the erosion of our democracy, poverty, environmental destruction. And these are things that, if we don't do anything about today, will be faced by our children and grandchildren. And it's just unfair if we don't think about these long-term problems, think past the next election and try to tackle these problems and not simply pass them on to the next generation and letting them worry about it. We've done too much of that. That's why I'm involved in politics. I want to make sure that our children and grandchildren aren't burdened with problems that we failed to tackle. And if you want a member of parliament who's going to think past the next election, who's rooted in Kingston and the islands and came back here to live because this is his community, the place that he loves and where his family is living and is from, vote for me. Vote for me to be the person to look after the future of Kingston and the islands.
We've heard a lot of promises here tonight, but I just want to reiterate what I said in the opening. This Conservative government will continue the sound economic management that has steered us through a tough recession and created 500,000 new jobs since June of 2009. This government has already committed $15 million to a performing arts center here at Queen's, $29 million to a lovely new medical building for our bright medical minds that we hope will stay here in Kingston. The government will continue to invest in students, keeping taxes low to encourage investments in our economy to create the kinds of jobs that you here will be looking for once you graduate. We need to stay the course. This is no time for a U-turn. We need to find ways to keep your bright minds here in Kingston. The choice locally is between a member who sits with the government and can get things done, or an MP who sits on the opposition benches. May 2nd or earlier, vote for Alicia Gordon, our best voice for Kingston and the Islands. Go Gales, go.
Thank you.
Well, I want to sort of start off the initial message to sort of give a heartfelt thanks to everyone who came here today. I think there's a lot of amazing energy in this room tonight. I think that compared to, this is our 5th debate now. And as we've gone through them, everyone is a little bit different. I think that you folks who are here have to take credit for making it different. The questions you asked and the way you got involved has made it sort of added a different tone to everything we do. What that means, though, is every time we take part in these things, we learn something, and that's really what it's supposed to be about. It's one thing for us to speak with an authoritative voice to you, but if we don't learn from you, then we're not doing our job, right? Now, and I learned a lot tonight because I learned that Ted can tell Michael Ignatieff what to do, so that might come in handy in the future. Well, I wonder if we'll test that one out. Now, I think what we really need to do just before we end, though, is make sure that we thank everyone who was involved with putting this on, including our moderator and all the crew, the young lady in front, and everyone who took part in it. This was a very well done event, and for my part, I'm going to just stray right off message and thank you for being involved. But what I'm going to do is urge you to stay involved with it. This election is critical. It's not critical, though, just simply from a strategic vote point of view. It's critical because we get to choose, once again, what do we believe in? What are the things we believe in our country? What is our government for? And what kind of government do we need going forward? I think I'm going to leave that decision to you, but I hope that you take your time to, make the decision very carefully. Come talk to any one of us, call us if you need to sort of help making your decision. We should be there for you to make sure that you're comfortable changing our democracy as we move forward. Have a good night.
Just before we wrap up, I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, I wanted to thank Kieran Slobodan as the Academic Affairs Commission for putting this on and providing the venue and also getting all of you here. I wanted to thank Amanda and Callum for helping me here. As a political scientist, we talk a lot about apathy and we talk a lot about apathy. All questions here and the fact there are still many to come, I think speaks of something different. So I wanted to thank all of you for your time and your patience and your interest, especially in the middle of exams. Finally, I wanted to remind you that advanced polling for Queen's students here is the 22nd, the 23rd, and the 25th, and it'll take place in this room, as I understand. So regardless of what your intention is, young people have the lowest rate of voting turnout, as we know, in the country, and it's really important that I think all of you get out on May 2nd or earlier to exercise your vote. So thank you very much for your time, and thanks for coming out. No, no.